We are just 2 days away, everybody, from Notre Dame against Ohio State. That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll. You know who we are, Ryan. Let's just dive right in, man. Today, as we are now a little over 48 hours away from kickoff for Notre Dame, Ohio State. Number 5 Notre Dame against number 2 Ohio State. Epic matchup. First time they've met in the regular season since 1996. Statement game opportunity for Notre Dame. It's a big opportunity for Ohio State. There's a lot at stake here, Ryan, and we today are going to talk about the keys to victory for Notre Dame. Tomorrow we'll make our score predictions. We'll have some fun with it. We'll have our countdown to kickoff show on Saturday at 10 a.m. Sean Stiers and Vince D'Addario will have that. But Ryan, there's this perception that Notre Dame just doesn't have a chance. And This is a 17.5 point deal, and it's because of this and because of that. And, we've been here before, to be honest with you. You look back, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, this was the same argument we were having going into week 2 of the 2019 season, right? Or week 3 of the 2019 season when Notre Dame was going down to play Georgia. They were 16-point underdogs to go down and play Georgia in 2019. It was kind of like, but why? Notre Dame is the number 7 team in the country. Georgia's number 3. Like, you don't see a lot of teams that are top 10 being 2+ touchdown underdogs on the road. And as we've talked about before, they've got to earn that respect. And we believe that this is a winnable game for Notre Dame. But even if Notre Dame had the Lou Holtz track record the last 10 years of success against top 10 teams, going on the road in Columbus, number 2 team in the country against that offense and the talent that roster has, it's not an easy task.
Sure.
And so what we're going to discuss today is we're not going to spend a lot of time about what the line should or shouldn't be and all those type of things. We're going to acknowledge the fact that this is a hard game. This is a tough team. This is a great opponent. And what I can't stand is when people will kind of tear down the opponent. And it's like, well, you just spent all week convincing people that team sucks. So when you win, don't be excited as if you had some big win, right? Well, we're definitely not doing that because this is an outstanding football team. But It's also a game, Ryan, that we believe Notre Dame absolutely has a chance to win. Margin for error may be thin, but there's no reason that Notre Dame can't win. And if they do the things we're going to talk about here today, they're going to go into the fourth quarter on Saturday night with an opportunity to win the football game.
I think a lot of my optimism comes from the coaching staff, honestly, Brian, and kind of the things that you're hearing. Again, we have to see it on the field, but we talked about it a little bit yesterday. They were talking about the line and disrespect, and sure, I feel like that there's an inherent thing that players are probably using that in the back of their mind, like, hey, that's some added motivation. But like my main point, Brian, was like, if you need that type of motivation to go in and play your best game against Ohio State, then like you're not it. You know what I mean? Like you have like if Tyler Buckner needs like a little added bonus of getting himself juiced for a game like that, then maybe he's not the guy that we think he can be, right? And that goes for every player on this football team, man. Like this is a game that you shouldn't need any extra to get you ready and to get you prepared and to get you juiced up. You're on the road, number 2 team in the country against a great football team. And I'm juiced myself, man. I'm looking forward to it because I feel like we are, I feel like we're very realistic, objective, but we're still optimists as far as like how good we think this football team can be. And I feel like we're at some points, I feel like we're kind of on an island with that. You know what I mean? But I really do.
I've been there before. I mean,
yeah,
I predicted a competitive victory or competitive game in 2019 against Georgia. Thought Notre Dame would beat LSU both times. I mean, that's just kind of how it is. I mean, and that's okay, but there's a reason, like you said, right? There's a reason for it.
Yes.
Right? You don't want people to keep thinking you should be 17. If you don't want to keep being a 17.5 point underdog on the road, then stop losing every big game you're playing. Okay? So, I mean, it's simple as that. And so that's what Notre Dame has to come out and prove and say, hey, look, because look, end of the day, I'm going to add to what I know you meant to say because we're on the same page here. The optimism does come from the coaching staff, but not because we think these coaches are miracle workers, but because we think this coaching staff, unlike last year's coaching staff, is filled with guys top to bottom that know how to put the talent in position to play to their potential.
Right.
That's the key. And this is what I wrote in an article today. I said, look, my optimism about Notre Dame's run game is not built. So Ryan and Sean had their stacking up article yesterday, or podcast yesterday. Well, I wrote my stacking up article today, which we always have at irishbreakdown.com. And I kind of made the run game matchup even between Notre Dame and Ohio State, simply because of you have to look at the numbers from last year. And the point that I made was this is Notre Dame's got to go show it.
Sure.
But the optimism about Harry Hiestand, which I talked about in my midweek musings article today, is he's not a miracle worker. We're not asking him to be a miracle worker. We're not asking him to come here and, wave a magic wand and sprinkle some secret sauce in the players' pregame meals to turn guys who aren't talented into great players. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, why is there such optimism about Brian Hartline getting the receiving core going? Why? Because they're talented kids, and he has a proven track record of getting the most out of his wide receivers. Well, guess what? So does Harry Hiestand when it comes to offensive linemen. So the talent is there. It's up to the coaching staff to get them in position to be successful, and you and I have great faith that they're going to do that. But this is a show-me business, as we always talk about. Yep. And now they got to prove it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of go through offensively, defensively, special teams, and then there's one overarching big picture key to success that I have not told Ryan about, but I have a feeling he's going to know exactly what it is, and we're going to agree on this. So, Ryan, let's begin with the keys to victory for the Notre Dame offense. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to try to give you a little bit more detail than just simply don't turn the ball over, the simple things, right?
Like coaching cliches. Let's call them coaching
block,
cliches.
And catch. Okay, yes. Great. That's wonderful. But some of the stuff is going to be sort of obvious, and we're going to explain why they're important. So we're going to take 4 keys on each side of the ball, and they kind of build on each other. They're not necessarily most important to least important, or least important building to the most important. They all kind of build on each other. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the offense, I think the first one is a big picture thing, Ryan. It is imperative, and I asked Coach Freeman about this today's press conference. They have to start fast. Yep. The one thing you simply cannot do, on top of don't turn the ball over, stuff like that, the one thing you cannot do against this Ohio State team is fall behind big early.
Yes.
That's why they get the 66-17s and the 56-7s, because they just jump all over a team. Then you get in this mode where you're now out of your game. You've got to now throw. They can pin the ears back, come after you, force turnovers. The next thing you know, it's 35-7 at halftime.
Yep.
Where that's what this team can do to you if you're not able to kind of come out and set your agenda immediately. So the first thing this Notre Dame offense has to do is start fast. And we'll get into all of the things of what that looks like, Ryan. But if the defense is starting off well, then you've got to get some separation early and make Ohio State play catch up. If the defense maybe needs 2 to 3 series to kind of get caught up to what Ohio State's doing, and Ohio State's putting points on the board, you got to match and keep the defense in the game and long enough for them to make the necessary changes. It's either one of those things required that the Notre Dame offense come out early and be effective in moving the ball and getting points early. That's sort of the big picture key to this game, because if you don't do that, this game could be over by halftime, and that's true for anybody Ohio State plays. That was true for Clemson in the 2020 playoff game. They couldn't keep up early, and Ohio State just overwhelmed them, and then they had no chance. You have to be able to come out early and start fast.
I think there's 2 keys from that sense, Brian, for me. One is the natural Ohio State, and this is most offenses, so this isn't something that is just relative to Ohio State, but offenses for most part, they feed off of staying in rhythm, right? Building on gaining momentum. Ohio State's the same way, man. There's going to be moments where Ohio State, the offense is going to be methodical, right? It's just going to move at a very good pace, and you're going to have to kind of counteract that momentum. And if they get up on you, that means that their offense is probably humming, and then you have to come from behind. And then at that point, you're saying, even if you can mount a comeback, you have to get into a shootout with them. And that's not an advantageous way to beat Ohio State. It's not. We talked about that yesterday a little bit. You don't want to get into a game where, although I have the utmost confidence in Tyler Buchner, I don't want him to get into a shootout with CJ Stroud, right? I don't want that to happen.
CJ throw for throw. You
don't want that to happen, right? You want to alternate punches, but you do not want to get a situation where you have to now be perfect, and your margin for error now reduces to that smallest amount. And the other thing for me, Brian, I don't know if you agree with this, but Notre Dame is also a young football team in a lot of spots, right? Like we've talked endlessly this offseason about the sophomore class and why it gives us so much hope, right? Getting off to a good start builds confidence very quickly if you're a younger team, right? But adversely, and I'm not saying this is, again, this isn't relative to Notre Dame. This is relative to all young players for the most part. If they hit adversity early, sometimes it shrinks you a little bit, especially if it's your first career start in the horseshoe, right? Like those things can be detrimental to playing your best possible football game. So getting off to a fast start, I think also building confidence for a younger football team in a lot of spots. I think that is it's my biggest takeaway, if we're being completely honest, is I need the sophomores, the younger players, the guys that might be starting their first game at Notre Dame, they need to build confidence early. And it would be the worst possible outcome if Ohio State jumps on them, because I just don't know how that's going to affect some of their psyche, if we're being honest.
Well, on top of that too, Ryan, you have to look at it from the standpoint of the faster that they start off, the louder the crowd noise gets, the more raucous the environment gets, and that's a part of it. I mean, I think sometimes home field advantage can be overplayed a little bit. Like you're not a 20-point better team than someone, but because you're on the road, you're a 10-point worse team than them. But a game that could be a 4-point game in either direction could be the difference between that home environment. That's something that hurt Notre Dame in 2019 against Georgia. You lost by 6, a big part of the game. And how many false start penalties because you weren't prepared for the crowd noise? Like that's the most asinine thing I've ever heard Brian Kelly say. And that's a guy that said a lot of asinine things. How are you not prepared for it was going to be loud at Georgia? I don't think Marcus Freeman's going to make that same mistake. But the point is the louder the crowd gets, the worse it gets. And then you flip to Michigan State. Anyone that's been at Spartan Stadium knows the Spartan Stadium can get a little bit loud. And you think of the 2018 game or 2017 game at Notre Dame. I mean, they got on them quick. They went right down the field on their first drive. Bam, bam, bam. Deep ball to St. Brown. Brandon scores on a quarterback draw, 7-0. Brian Lewerke takes Michigan State to get around near midfield. Julian Love pick 6, and you could hear a pin drop in that stadium. 14-0, just like that. Mm-hmm. By halftime, they knew the game was over. And, so now you're on the road, and it's now a pro Notre Dame environment, because it's your crowd making noise, not theirs. But when the opposite is true, which is what happened later that year in Miami, is Notre Dame allowed Miami to get off to a good start, and that place went nuts. And that is one of the most front-running crowds ever. Well, Ohio State fans are not front-runners. They're going to be loud until they no longer have a reason to be loud. And that's going to be the key is they're going to have to but that factors into your youth thing, Ryan. Mm-hmm. Some of the veterans are used to that. They've been in those environments before, right? But the younger guys, this may be the first time they've been in that environment. And that's why it's important to kind of come out quickly and just try to keep that crowd a little bit out of this contest.
I mean, and to your point too, Brian, you're 7:30 in the horseshoe, right? Like it's going to be loud there naturally. So you're going to be fighting against the crowd a little bit, right? And that only gets worse if you're also getting off to a slow start and you're letting them build momentum. The more momentum they grab, the louder that crowd is going to get. And that is also can be debilitating a little bit to a younger team in some spots, right? Like how are sophomores, freshmen, whatever it is, how are they going to react to that type of environment? That's what is going to be interesting. I mean, it's going to be loud regardless, but especially if Ohio State's able to gain some momentum early, it might be a tough thing to overcome.
So let's go to point number 2, Ryan. And point number 2 is an obvious one, but it's an important one, and it's a little bit of an all-encompassing one, and that is they have to control the line of scrimmage. There are so many aspects to this, right? It's not just run the football, right? Establish the run. That's true, and that's going to be point number 3. And so we're going to kind of do these two together a little bit because they do kind of go together, but it's not as simple as just establishing the line of scrimmage to run the ball. There's a lot more to it than that. And the first thing for me, when I think of establishing the line of scrimmage, Ryan, is you're setting a tone. Because what does control the line of scrimmage means? It means you're coming off your physical, you're getting movement, your assignment correct, you're gashing Ohio State. And gashing doesn't mean you're ripping off 40-yard run after 40-yard run. It means you're going 5, 6, 7, 9, 15, 5, 6, 8. You're just gashing them. You're just moving the chains with ease, just nonstop because you're controlling the line of scrimmage with the run game. Your backers are not able to get over. You're easily getting off to the second level, things along those lines. Those are all things that where you want to be as an offense is just setting that tone, that physical, like, hey, y'all, we're here for a battle. We're here to fight. I mean, you better make sure that you're ready to bring it. That's part number one to it. Part two is control line of scrimmage is protecting the quarterback. I mean, that's another big part of it is, Ohio State's, defensive linemen are talented, but they were really young last year and they're going to be way better. Well, that's also true of Notre Dame's offensive tackles. Blake Fisher and Joe Alt, they're really talented and really young. So who wins that battle? Well, I got a better we have a new defensive coordinator now. He's going to make them better. Oh, okay. Notre Dame hired Harry Heastan, right? Like, we could do this game all day. End of the day, they got to play well. They've got to control the line of scrimmage. They can't let those young players who are very talented. JT is talented. Talik Williams is very talented, right? I know you're very high on his film. He didn't play a ton last year, which adds, like 180 some snaps is all he played. Guy had like 7 tackles for loss and 5 sacks on those 180 some plays. Highly productive player. Jack Sawyer's a talented kid. They're playing in a defense that's a little bit more sound than it was last year, if I'm being kind, but also one that's aggressive. You've got to be able to stone them. Hey, if they bring 5 or 6, you step up, you plant them on the ground, you chop that linebacker that blitzes, and you give your quarterback time to throw the football. That's just another way that you start fast and control established line of scrimmage. And then, of course, the final piece is kind of point number 3, Ryan, and that's what we'll put them together is controlling line of scrimmage then leads to the ability to run the football.
Yep.
And if Notre Dame can run the football effectively early, that is how it accomplishes a lot of the things that we talked about. It keeps them in good down and distances, right? What's the key to starting early? Keep yourself ahead of the chains all game long. If you're running the ball early, that means your quick game is more effective because you're avoiding 2nd and 9s and 2nd and 12s and 3rd and 8s. Where you're in a 3rd and 3, and it's like, hey, guys, we have our whole offensive package here on 3rd down. That makes it harder to defend. It makes it forces them to get more into the box, which then opens up your perimeter pass game. Marcus Freeman has talked a lot about, Ryan, the players have mentioned it a lot, got to defend 53 and a third. Well, that's fine, but the best way to attack 53 and a third is to condense the defense. The way that you condense the defense is by running the football effectively, between the tackles. And there's some things you can do on the perimeter. But if you're gashing them with inside zone and duo and counters and power, quarterback power read and things like that, then all of a sudden, boy, they're in a bind. And then all of a sudden you start getting the read zone stuff with Tyler Buckner. And then that overhang has to be thinking like, okay, I can't defend the bubble because I got to worry about Tyler Buckner pulling this thing. Next thing you know, you're doing that read zone. That guy squeezes in, you pull it, and you throw it out on the bubble screen. That's how that to me is. I'm a believer of working inside out. Just that's my philosophy. I think Tommy Rees is similar. If you work inside out, you're going to be effective. What killed Notre Dame last year in the bowl game is Notre Dame kind of worked outside in because they couldn't run the ball. Well, after the first couple quarters, after just shredding Oklahoma State for 30 minutes, they were able to say, okay, look, we're going to take away their quick stuff on the outside, and we're going to put more resources to, defending that box. And because Notre Dame couldn't defend that, they were able to then drop guys underneath some of the quick game, take the quick game away with the press. And because Notre Dame couldn't run the football, all that perimeter stuff was gone.
Yep.
And, that's the thing is if they would have been able to come out in the third quarter and run the football, Oklahoma State's counter to the perimeter pass game stuff would have resulted in just getting gashed, right? Just ramming them up the middle. And so that's the thing is if you can establish the running game, it opens up so many other things. It's harder to defend 53 and a third when you've got to worry about what's going on in the box. And so controlling the line of scrimmage leads to all those things. And the end result at the end of the day is you're running the football, and that's going to be a big, big key for Notre Dame against Ohio State.
And everything is built off of the run in this offense, in my opinion, right? Like some offenses are built for the pass to set up the run. Some are built up for the run to set up the pass. But Notre Dame's offense specifically is one where like it's a sequence of things, right? It goes from ability to run the ball, establishes the read game, the ability to pull and work the RPO game, the ability to work and do the play action game. All of those things are so intertwined in this offense. And honestly, the biggest key for me is that in this segment is you want to get Tyler Buckner comfortable, right? And how to get him comfortable is to get a run game going, man, because all his skill set works so well off the fact of if you were able to just, you mentioned, running some, counters and doing everything. But I mean, as simple as if you can just get a solid push and you're able to establish just inside zone early, like just as simple as possible, and get that read game go and get the RPO game, you're going to get him some easy completions on quick game. You're going to have some easy completions that are going to turn into bigger plays working in the RPO game. And then you're going to give him some opportunities to take shots down the field. All those things spurn off of the one simple fact that Notre Dame has to be able to run the football. If they can, then I don't think there's any limits, any cap on how good this offense can be. Not only just against Ohio State, but just in general. Like, it all feeds off of one another. Notre Dame averaged 4.1 yards a carry last year. It's not good enough. It's not.
Not even close.
Not even close.
Not even in the universe.
No.
The same galaxy is good. Right.
No, it's not. Because, I mean, even we've talked about Ohio State not having the emphasis on the run game enough last year. They averaged 5.5 yards a carry. Right? Like, exactly. It's just crazy. So, for Notre Dame to be as successful as possible, you have to establish the run, because also, Brian, the weakest, well, I don't want to say the weakest. The area of concern that I have most for Ohio State's defense is the linebackers, right? The linebackers, second-level defenders. I want to force them into making some mistakes, right? Like, I want them to feel very unsettled and uncomfortable on the second level, because, I mean, RPO can mess with a lot of different players, structurally, third level, second level. But the one that you think of most is that overhang and that weak side linebacker, right? Like, those are the positions where you're like, RPO game is going to mess with those dudes all day, every day. Establishing a run game is going to give you those options. And you want options in this game if you're going to be successful offensively.
Well, even if you look at Notre Dame, the last couple of years, they had a 1,000-yard running back. Kyron Williams was a 1,000-yard rusher. Right, the Notre Dame offensive line was a Joe Moore Award finalist in 2020. They still weren't a great rushing team in 2020. They may have had a talented offensive line. They played some bad teams. They benefited from having Harry and Chris Watt involved in that. And if you don't believe me, I don't care. I know it's true. Right, and that was the anomaly. But if you look at the last 4 years, Notre Dame averaged 4.1 yards per carry, 5.02 in 2020, 4.92, and 4.43. Since Harry left. The last year of Harry Hiestand being here, it was 6.25. That's a pretty big jump. And then, like 2015 was the other year they were a great rushing team. They were 5.6. But that 5.6 came, they gave up some sacks to Sean Kaiser, averaged 3.9 as a rusher. But they had, some minus yards on team. But their leading rusher that year, CJ Prosise, averaged 6.55 yards per carry, and Josh Adams averaged 7.2 yards per carry. You look at 2017, Josh Adams was a 6.9 yards per carry. Brandon Wimbush was a 5.7. Deion McIntosh was a 5.7. Dexter Williams was a 9.2. And Notre Dame's, kind of trying to think the least explosive guy on their roster that year, a running back, was Tony Jones, who was their ball control back. He averaged 5.3 yards per carry. So it was just one of those things where that's the range that Notre Dame has to be in. Whereas you look at Kyron Williams the last 2 years, and this isn't a knock on Kyron Williams, he averaged only 5.3 yards per carry in 2020, the year that he was a 1,000-yard back, second-team All-American. On the 2017 offense, he was barely ahead of Tony Jones. He would have been the fourth highest back in yards per carry on that team. Tony Jones is a 5.27. He was last. Deion McIntosh averaged 5.7 yards per carry. And then Josh Adams was 6.9 and Brandon Wimbush was 5.7. Right?
I can't believe that Deion McIntosh averaged 5.7 yards a carry. Yeah. That's bizarre, man. That's crazy.
I mean, they racked up 180 yards on Michigan State that year in a game in which Michigan State, if you remember, Ryan, had the number 2 rush defense in the country that year.
That was like Joe Bocci and all that crew, right?
Yes, yeah. And Kenny
Willikis.
Yes, he was another guy on that group. But that team, Ryan, if you remember, Josh Adams got hurt in the first half. Then Dexter had a few carries, caught a touchdown pass. He got hurt. Tony Jones was already out because he got hurt against BC the week before. Second half, they go for $180 on Michigan State's second-ranked rush defense. They played almost the whole second half with Deion McIntosh as their running back.
He ran hard, man. So, I'll give him credit. He ran hard in that game.
He did. But that was the point, is like it didn't matter who was at running back. It was because it was about the line. And that's going to be the key here, is that they've got to be able to have that kind of team, not just as a whole, as a season, but in this game. They've got Chris Tyree's got a gash. Audrick's got a gash. Logan's got a gash. And then, of course, Tyler Buckner's got to do what he's got to do. And I'm not even talking about scrambles. I don't want to see Tyler Buckner with like 75 yards of scrambles, and you're like, hey, we ran for 190 yards against Ohio State. I'm like, yeah, but like Tyler Buckner had a 50-yard gain on a scramble and a pass play. You didn't run the ball. It's not about rushing yards. It's about effectively running the football on running downs. That's the key. You've got to do that. And then the fourth piece, Ryan, for this one to me is Tommy Rees has to find ways to scheme up opportunities for big plays. And when those opportunities come, they've got to make them. In games like this, with Notre Dame's offense against Ohio State's defense, to me, and it's the same way on the other side of the ball, you're going to have somewhere between 5 to 7 opportunities. If the other team plays well and you play well, you're going to have at the most 5 to 7 opportunities to rip off a big play. Mm-hmm. And you've got to take advantage on the majority of those plays. And you've got to create those opportunities. We've talked about this week, Ryan. You go back and watch the Clemson game in 2018. They harassed Trevor Lawrence the whole game. He only had 5 or 6 clean pockets the whole game. But you know what he did on those 5 or 6 clean pockets? He ripped Notre Dame. I mean, just ripped them. That you have to take advantage of those things. Notre Dame hasn't been able to do that on offense in past years. We've seen last year, Ryan, in September, watching all 22 for you. I was at most, those road games, and you're watching Braden Lindsey just smoke a guy on a post route, and the ball never comes because the quarterback's getting sacked. Yep. There's opportunities where the quarterback doesn't get to that second read, which was, guy coming open on a wheel route. Those are missed opportunities Notre Dame cannot afford. It's up to Tommy Rees to game plan and call those things, which is going to involve a lot of things. It's what I asked Coach Freeman about, and using motions and shifts. And he explained why those are dangerous for a defense. It causes a lot of communication. You find yourself, maybe you communicate incorrectly, where if you just line up and play, then the defense can make their calls and everybody knows what to do. And that was some of the things I used to complain about, like 14, 15, and 16, is they would just kind of come out in 11 personnel and run, flex, or they'd just run like doubles, and just, the motion would be like, the back would go from right to left. You know what I mean? Like that would be it. That's not even a motion. That's just okay, we've checked the call and we're going to run inside zone this way. And it was pretty easy to kind of tell what Notre Dame was going to do, and they still would score on people.
Yep.
If you can do things where you're motioning, like where you shift across, then motion, and do all those type of things, you're going to be able to, and then doing things to isolate, even something as simple last year against Stanford, where you motion Braden Lindsey down to get him off the press and then bang a quick post route, and it sets up for a touchdown because you're able to play action, ISO that flat defender, he's going to be inside the safety, and then bam, you nail it. Doing different things like that, where you're able to generate a leverage advantage, an angle advantage, a numbers advantage, getting a matchup that you like. Hey, we really like Lorenzo Styles against that guy in coverage. We really want to try to find ways to isolate Chris Tyree against this matchup in coverage. We think we can do this with Michael Mayer to get him in a good matchup. Or we think when we move Michael Mayer here, they're going to so overreact to that we can then get something going back here with this matchup. All that is part of the chess match that is what I love about football. It's the relationships with players, and that are the only two things I miss about coaching. It's that mental chess match that is a Saturday, where I'm running this because I know I'm going to get you to sucker down. And as soon as I get you to sucker down, I'm running double post over your head. You know what I mean? Like all part of that stuff is Tommy Rees has got to be on top of his game.
Yep.
And then if those calls are made, it's got to be executed. If Braden Lindsey beats a guy on a post route, the line's got to protect. If the line protects, Tyler Buckner's got to make the throw. If Tyler Buckner makes a throw, you got to haul it in. You can't miss those opportunities because you won't get a bunch of them against Ohio State. And when those opportunities come, especially in the pass game, they got to take advantage. So creating big plays is a big key, because I just don't think – I know ball control and all this, but I just don't think for 60 minutes Notre Dame's going to be able to just go on a bunch of 10 to 12 play drives, eat up the clock, each team gets 6 possessions, and like all of a sudden it's like playing the triple option. That's not going to happen. If you want to win this game, yes, you need to control the ball and do it, but you got to generate some big plays. And to me, big plays are just as discouraging to a defense as just getting the ball ran down your throat for 15 straight plays. I think they both can be detrimental to your psyche as a defensive player, Ryan. And if you can do both, then I think it's almost like, well, what are we going to do? What can we do now? So I do think there need to be some big plays, because we talked about what the run game can do for the pass game. If the run game is successful and that opens up some pass game opportunities, Ohio State has zero chance to slow Notre Dame down. Zero. Because if you have to put resources to stop the run game and we're winning one-on-ones, looking at it from a coaching standpoint, and we're winning one-on-ones on the outside, I've got everything that I can run at you.
Yeah.
And if it's executed, then it's going to be successful. And we talked a lot about that being a danger in defending Ohio State. I think this year it's going to be a problem for teams defending Notre Dame. Now they got to go out and prove us to be correct on that, because I think you and I both believe there's some athletes on this Notre Dame offense that can be game changers. Tom Reese has got to design up those opportunities. Lions got to block. Buckner's got to get the ball out, and they've got to make those plays. I think that, to me, is the final key for this offense to be able to win this game.
And I'm pretty confident in just the structure that it's going to happen, right? Because I know we've talked a lot about this. There's talent, obviously. Tommy Reese, I think, is a very bright guy, and he understands how to scheme things open. I believe in that. The biggest thing that we've talked about all offseason is you got Chancey Stuckey to come in here, and you got Harry Heastand back, because you haven't been able to take advantage of those things because not everything is working in a complete manner, right? Like last year, like you said, there were some guys open, but protection might break down. Might be a guy that can't get off a press, and it disrupts the timing of a pass play, right? Like there was those inconsistencies last year from just a general understanding of how to play football, if we're being completely honest, right? And how to play the position, should say, the nuance of playing wide receiver, playing offensive line. I have a feeling that those things will be better. And I have a feeling that Tommy Reese will be able to scheme some stuff open. At that point, it's about your guys making plays, man. And if they're prepared, I think they have an opportunity to create big plays. Because the biggest thing for me, Brian, is, and we talked about this, I think Jim Knowles is going to look at this offense and Harry Heastand coming back and the running back stable they have and Tyler Buckner as a running quarterback. And they're going to look at them and say, you're going to try to run the football on us, and we're not going to let you do that. Point blank, right?
And Notre Dame hasn't hidden that fact throughout the entire fall camp.
They haven't. Every time you hear Marcus Freeman, he's talking about establishing the run and getting that pace going. And yeah, 100%. And Jim Knowles knows it, I think. Right. I don't think it's chicken. Like, I think that Marcus Freeman truly believes that's what we're going to do, right? And in that simple fact, Jim Knowles is going to allocate resources so that doesn't happen. So what does that give you? That means there's less allocated resources to play, it may be a robber coverage to one side, or double, bracket a wide receiver, or, to have two guys that kind of eyes on Michael Mayer all the time, right? Like, there's going to be less allocated opportunities in the passing game. So that means one-on-one opportunity somewhere. It's going to be a one-on-one opportunity at some point. Well, not at some point, a lot in this football game early on, in my opinion. I think there's going to be a lot. And the only reason that they have to change their philosophy in that regard, right, Brian, is if you make a couple plays, right? Like, he's not going to change unless you make him change. Right. You hit a couple big plays, then there's less players in the box. And that's where you start chipping away at that defense. And I mean, if you can run the ball even with players in the box, you sure as anything can run the ball with less players in the box, right? So it comes off of the simple fact that you have to be able to run the football, but when they allocate the resources to stopping the run, you have to win one-on-one matchups. You have to. You have a quarterback that is a dynamic type of athlete. You have multiple wide receivers that are 4.4s and better athletes. You have a running back that is a 4.3 athlete. You have athletes if you're Notre Dame. But in order for them to really respect the ability to work on the perimeter, work vertically, work space, they have to make plays, and they're going to get those one-on-one matchups, and you have to capitalize. There's no doubt.
A game that this reminds me a lot of is the 2017 USC game. Now, this Ohio State team is better than that USC team in 2017. Like, that was an 11-3 USC team, but that wasn't a great team. It was a really good team with a lot of weapons. So this isn't a complete apples to apples comparison, but the point that I'm going to make is the same. USC was not a 49-14 worse team than Notre Dame. Why was Notre Dame able to have success that day? Because USC came into that game and said, you are not going to beat us running the football. Kind of Notre Dame, I think, went out three and out on that first drive. They came out that next drive, and they just started hitting USC with stuff down the field. I mean, early in the game, they ran I think it might have been on the second series. they just got Kevin Stepherson back. And so what do? They come out and they run a reverse with him. I'm actually going to look that play-by-play up because I believe I'm correct on that. Yeah. They came out that next series after the first 3 and out. Brandon Wimbush goes for 12 yards on a quarterback run. They run a reverse to Kevin Stepherson that goes for 13 yards. And then Brandon Wimbush bangs a post route over the top for a touchdown to Equanimeous St. Brown. Just like that, it's 7-0. Right. And then they get the ball back, and the defense and Notre Dame, the next series goes down 7 yard, goes 7 points. And how do they score? Brandon Wimbush throws a downfield back shoulder to Kevin Stepherson for a touchdown. Notre Dame was running the ball okay in that game, some 10-yard runs, 13 runs. They also had another 11-yard run for Kevin Stepherson on that series as well. So they were kind of getting USC guessing. The ability to throw the ball down the field and bang them with some of those reverses, all of a sudden, USC's like, okay, how the heck do we defend this team now? Like, what are we supposed to do now? And so then that kind of leads to all of a sudden Notre Dame just starts wearing them down and just gashing them, because now you've got to worry about the reverses that are hurting you. You've got to worry about the post routes over top that are hurting you. Now all of a sudden USC has no answers. They're 3rd and 10. They're dropping back. Brandon Wimbush takes off running and converts the 3rd down. Like, when you can get a team like that into that scenario, all of a sudden a game where Notre Dame was probably a 7 to 10 point better team than USC. Ohio State that year beat USC 24-17, right? I mean, they were a good team that year, but why was Notre Dame able to absolutely destroy them? Because USC's defense, that's what we call defending the whole width and length of the field, Ryan, is that right there. When you're hitting them with that stuff and those big plays and throwing the ball down the field, how do you defend the run then? Because USC's had a very similar philosophy that everybody else is going to play this team is going to have. And this team, I think, has more weapons in the pass game than I think that 2017 team did. With Cameron Smith, I mean, that was the first game back for Stepherson, or second game back. He played sparingly against North Carolina the week before. But if you can create those big plays in the pass game, it almost makes it impossible to stop that offense. And again, we've said that about Ohio State. If they can run the football, it makes it really hard to stop their pass game, and vice versa, because they both make each other better. So those big play opportunities, because just completing a 15-yard gain, the occasional 20-yard gain, is not going to force Jim Knowles to come out of his game plan. It's got to be that, oh, snap, we went cover 1. Braden Lindsey just smoked my guy on the outside for a 50-yard touchdown. Or, I thought I could put Tommy Eichenberg in coverage against Chris Tyree, and they just scored a 50-yard touchdown on a narrow route where he just outran the guy, or on a wheel route or something like that. Or, those are the kind of things that are going to make you say, you know what, like they're burning us. And not blown coverages either. It's like just you scheme yourself into those big opportunities, and it's going to force Ohio State to think twice. And that's the way to do it. I mean, that's the only way that they're going to be able to have a chance in this game to score enough to win this game. Because again, this is not. I'll be shocked if this is a 20-17 game. Shocked. I don't think you beat them with 20 points or 23 points or even 27 points per se. You're going to have to get to at least 30. And in order to do that, you're going to need big plays. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean, I even think back to the Michigan game last year, Brian. That game was on TV a little bit earlier. I was about to text you about it, but I mean, Cade McNamara was a very average quarterback last year, right? But in that game, although he didn't throw the ball much, he made a couple explosive plays, man. And he made a couple plays. He had a couple pass interference plays get called in that game. You have to create those explosive plays when you just know, man, Ohio State. And again, I know it's a completely different defense and it's a completely different situation. I get it. But my point is that what team you're talking about, if a team is having trouble stopping the run, they're always going to allocate more to stopping the run, right? Like that's simple 101 stuff, right? Like it's I'm getting beat here. I need to do something different to stop it. And then if you are having trouble now stopping the other thing, because you have to allocate resources, then you're a defensive coordinator never wants to get in the in-between, Brian. It's like the in-between between being true to your scheme and then having to play out of your scheme, right? Like when you get into that little gray area there, then you start to scramble, man. And it is not fun. You're just like last second, like, linebacker blitz A gap. Like, I don't know what to do anymore, like you don't want to ever have that type of just quick impulsive decisions because you just don't have an answer. And big plays and running the football, those things together will make any defensive coordinator very nervous.
Yes.
Very nervous.
Ryan, before we transition to the defense, I do want to thank Tony Shea for this big super chat. Tony with a massive super chat. Appreciate you, Tony. He said, here's 99 of the 1,000 I'm going to win Saturday. Go Irish. I hope
Let's
you
do
are right,
it.
friend. Hope
Love
you
it.
are right. So, Ryan, let's transition to the keys to the Notre Dame defense. And to me, there are some keys that aren't really keys, but they're important. You know, like don't turn the ball over on offense. That's an obvious one. That shouldn't be one of your 4 keys to the game. That's like anyone that remotely follows football can be like, key to the game, don't turn it over. Okay, cool. The one for me on defense that's the same thing, like it's not going to be one of these 4 because it's a given, is They got to tackle, right? They've got to tackle. They got to tackle well. That should be a key to the game. That should be duh. Yeah, you got to tackle. And so hopefully this team has done what it needs to do this offseason to become a much better tackling team, because all the great scheme in the world goes right out the window if you can't tackle. And that's going to be a big, big part of this game. However, there are some other things that we do think are important, and hopefully good tackling is sprinkled in throughout all 4 of these things. And again, it's going to kind of build on top of each other. So to me, the biggest thing is, again, it's controlling the line of scrimmage.
Yes.
That's going to be another big key. And it's not as simple as shutting down the run. It's not as simple as it's all of it. And to me, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to tie these 2 points together, Ryan, because I think they go together and build each other. Is a key number 2 is you've got to be disruptive. What does disruption mean against a team like Ohio State? You're constantly resetting the line of scrimmage in your favor. You're not allowing them to play within rhythm. That means a lot of things. Like we talk about run game. Best way to stop a run game, make the running back declare behind the line of scrimmage. If a running back is basically staying on his run track to the point where he is making a cut off of a block that is effective, it's going to be minimum 5-yard gain. Right? If the running back is running through the line of scrimmage on his track, it's going to be minimum 5-yard gain. And Ohio State's going to try to do the same thing to Notre Dame. Yeah, it's nice to get the 50-yard runs, but if they're just 5, 6, 8, 12, 5, 7, 9, Notre Dame has no chance. That's the kind of run game that they need to eliminate. And so to me, it's that. It's make TreVeyon Henderson bounce to the perimeter 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage. That's the only chance you have to catch him and push him to the sideline. You know, make him cut on inside zone or their mid zone that they like to run. Make him cut 3-4 yards behind the line of scrimmage. And I'm going to point to this. I'm going to draw some lines here just to simply make a point. Ryan Day's NFL experience came under Chip Kelly. And Chip Kelly, even though his offense has kind of gotten stale, like he hasn't innovated lately, for a long time, I felt he was the most innovative run game guy in college football for a long time. There was one team in the Pac-12 that would give Oregon fits, not all the time, but a lot of times. That was Stanford. And what Stanford did to them and what Ohio State did to them to a degree, and this is after Chip Kelly when Mark Helfrich was there, what Ohio State did to them, I thought, in the 2014 game was they forced them to declare the run early. If you're letting them run their power read, this is referring to Oregon. If you're letting them run their power read where Marcus Mariota or Darren Thomas or Dennis Dixon could just ride that sucker all the way out, you're done. What Stanford was able to do was to attack and make him – it's a handoff, now go rally to the ball. Make the running back – and so the equivalent to this matchup is they're running their mid zone. They're running their counters. It's not like – true counter, but they're wraps and they're things like that. When they're running their outside zone, when they're running their inside zone, you need to make TreVeyon Henderson and Mayan Williams cut 3-4 yards behind the line. Because once they cut, they've now said, this is where we're going. And the further back they do that, the easier it is to rally. And you'll watch things where like a running back will make a cut and get tackled like 4 yards past the point where he made the cut. And you're like, they only gained 2 yards on that play? Yeah, because you reset the line and made him cut way behind the line of scrimmage. That's going to be the biggest key. And it's not even just about, tackles for loss are big, right? We've talked about that before. Getting a -2. But those are the things that create the consistent disruption that slow down a running game. So if you're giving up a 2-yard tackle for loss on 1st and 10 to make it 2nd and 12, and then on the next play, Travion runs outside zone, he stays right on his track, he cuts that sucker inside because they stretched it out, and all of a sudden you got a 7-yard gain. Ohio State's back to 3rd and 5, and that's where they're going to be okay. Yeah. Right? It's about consistent disruption. Guess what's better than what the scenario we just said? +1, +3. Now they're 3rd and 7, or +1, +2. Both pluses, but now they're in 3rd and 7. And there's a little bit of a different situation than 3rd and 5, 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3. And then that creates more opportunities for you to finally get that sack you need, or that -2 or -3. So it's the consistent disruption. It also involves getting hits on the quarterback. It means CJ, and the equivalent to Oregon would be, it's sort of like that's what you want to do to their pass game is what you did to the Oregon run game, which is make the ball get out quick. Look, rally to the ball, let them cab their 5, 6, 7-yard gains, but you're rallying the ball. You're forcing CJ to get rid of the ball quicker than he wants to, because what happens there, Ryan, with all the mesh stuff that they do, if you're constantly disruptive, they don't have time to let those mesh routes come clear. Now they're back to their hitches, their unders, their slants, their stops. Those are effective stuff, but those are plays where you're more likely to kind of catch them without them getting in space. Yep. Right. And if you can keep things in front of you and he has to get rid of that ball quickly, now all of a sudden you're rallying to the ball, and eventually someone gets a hand up, knocks a ball down, CJ misses on a throw, receiver falls down, you cover it well. That's where you get those opportunities to make stops, because you're not giving up the big plays, you're keeping it in front of you. All that stuff it sounds easy. It's not, but it all involves being really disruptive up front. And then when they do want to take their shots, he doesn't have time, because if you can speed up CJ Stroud's internal clock, and that's what they did to Marcus Mariota and Darren Thomas when Stanford would have success, is they would speed up Marcus Mariota's internal clock, and he had to get that ball out quicker in the run game and the pass game, and that's when you could shut them down. Because as good as Oregon was back then, they'd score like 50 a game, and then they'd have like this really weird game against Stanford where they just don't score. And you're like, well, hey, how the heck did that happen? I'm looking at Oregon. Here's a perfect example. 2012, Oregon goes 12-1. Here's what they did that year. Here's the points per game: 57, 42, 63, 49, 51, 52, 43, 70, 62, 59, 14 against Stanford. Next two games, 48, 35. Right? Because Stanford had that secret sauce, which was disrupt. Yep. Make them declare early, where everybody else was trying to play in space, right? Stanford had the D-line that was capable of disrupt, and it would just completely shut the Oregon offense down. And it was a weird thing, but that's what Oregon did, or that's what Arizona did in 2014 in the regular season when they beat Stanford. If you remember that game, they forced a lot of incompletions, a lot of short gains, because they were aggressive and attacked. Now, Oregon got them on the rematch, but they, the first time they played, that was why. And I think that's a very similar philosophy that you need against Ohio State. It's not even a philosophy. It's just execution. Disrupt. Do that, and you've got a chance at creating enough stops to keep the points down enough to win this football game.
I think usually when people think of pressure, disruption, penetration, they think of, like you said, speeding up CJ Stroud's clock. Sure, absolutely. But you also talked about the decision-making process of running backs, right? Like, you want to speed up their process as well. Like, the whole key to zone is that you let things develop, and then you cut where the gap makes sense, right? That's why a lot of times you'll see inside zone cut all the way back to backside A, backside B at times, right? Like, that's why, because you're letting things develop. Mesh, you're letting things develop. All those things involve an internal clock, whether that is running the football, whether that is passing the football. So disruption can even go, Brian, like, we can take it even further, right? Disruption is, and we're talking about like general disruption of a defensive line, second level, working into the backfield, disrupting the wide receivers at the releases, at the release points, right? Press releases, doing all those types of things. Make this offense have to make quicker decisions, speed up that process. And it's not just a CJ Stroud thing. It's not. And I know that people always think about that because it's, hey, I'm going to go hit my 3-step, 5-step, 7-step, whatever it is. And I'm going to work through my reads and my progressions, and I'm going to continue my process at a steady pace. But running zone is all about a process as well. Working RPO game is about a process. Those things are all processes. And if you disrupt those things, it creates a lot of bad decisions. It creates a lot of ill-advised decisions. It creates a lot of havoc can be made in the tackle for loss departments, sack departments, but more than anything, I want to make Ohio State have mistakes, and there's no better way than to disrupt the process, and that is the biggest thing for me.
Ryan, number 3 for me is they got to get to third down and they got to win. Now,
Yes.
The reason that we didn't say be good on third down is because there's the possibility that third down is a completely irrelevant down in this game. And we've pointed this out before. I'll just quickly point it out. Ohio State last year was really good on third down from an effectiveness standpoint, right? Second in the country at 52.6. That's great. Mm-hmm. And that you got to stop that. But here's the more important stat for me. Ohio State ranked 120th in the nation in third down opportunities. Now, in some stats, you don't want to be ranked really low. This particular one, it's a good thing, to be honest with you, in this context, because it meant they were really, really good. Now, it's not true for everyone, but in Ohio State's context, it is, because it means that they're killing you on first and second down. And that's we pointed this out about that great LSU offense back in 2019. They had 183 third downs, which ranked them 48th in the country in third down opportunities. Well, if you remember correctly, in that game or in that year, they also played one more game than Ohio State, 2 more games than Ohio State played last year.
Yep.
So it was, the numbers kind of are closer when you look at it that way. An offense like Ohio State, an offense like LSU, they're not getting to third down very often. If you're controlling the line and you're being disruptive, you have a greater chance of getting them into third down situations. Now, of course, the key then is you then have to have success, which is like, okay, we got to third down. Now what? Well, last year, both of these teams were great on third down. Notre Dame was great on third down last year, third down defense. They ranked 10th in that last year in third downs. And Notre Dame ranked 11th in forced turnovers. Ohio State ranked 2nd in third downs. So Notre Dame has to have success, in my opinion, on third down. Now, the problem, however, is that one of the issues with Notre Dame's defense last year is they ranked 79th in third down opportunities, meaning teams were getting a lot of third down opportunities on Notre Dame because they were allowing teams to kind of get more possessions because of the offense and other reasons, right? So hopefully the offense can play its part and the defense would kind of have a little bit of a bend but don't break, type of mentality where that would be the case too. And to a degree, you're going to have a little bit of that against Ohio State. You do want to keep things in front of you. I don't know if I want to do bend, right?
Sure.
But, you do want to keep things in front of you a little bit at times. Getting to the third down is important, and then having success on third down is even more important. And we're gonna kind of tie this into number 4 too, right? Because I think they go together. Red zone.
Yes.
Red zone success is important, and this is a little bit more complex than just keep their 7 opportunities to 3. That's the most obvious, right? But even deeper than that, you have to get them in the red zone. And what that means is don't let them score from the 40. Don't let them score from 50 yards out. Don't let them score from 60 yards out. If Travion Henderson rips off a 40-yard run, okay, that sucks, but make sure you tackle him inside the 20 and don't let him get into the end zone. Then you have a chance with the field reduced, with because now it's still 53 1/3, but you don't have 60 yards over top anymore. And you can be a little bit more effective there. So limiting big plays, Ryan, is a big part of the red zone defense opportunities for Notre Dame. Is you want to be in red zone opportunities. You want to be in third down opportunities. Because I believe, and this may sound a little nuts, Ryan, and if you want to push back on it, feel free. I kind of feel like I'm of the belief that the more plays Ohio State runs, the worse it is for them. And my example is here's the 4 games they had the most play. They ran the most plays in last year: Oregon, Michigan State, Nebraska, and Michigan. Now, Michigan State, they did great. The other 3, the offense never got to 30.
Yeah.
Now, they had a bunch of yards, but they kept having to run plays because those other teams limited the big plays. They got them in the red zone and a lot of times held them to field goals, or they didn't score at all, because the more plays you run, the more opportunities there are for you to make a mistake. I don't want 3-play 80-yard drives, right? I mean, it's just stating the obvious, but to me, that's a big thing. And if Notre Dame can limit those opportunities, that's going to be a big part of this game. Yes, you want to keep them out of the red zone completely, meaning they're not scoring at all, but that may not be a realistic. Get them into third downs, get them into the red zone, stop them on third down, hold them to field goals. If you do that, Ohio State could go right up and down the field the first 4 times on Notre Dame and score every time. But if they're all field goals, you've given up 12 points, or 1 touchdown and 3 field goals. It's 16 points, right? You're in the game now, and that's going to be a key to this game.
Brian, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. Look, Ohio State is going to make some plays, obviously, right? They have dudes. We've been talking about this all week, all summer. Jackson Smith-Njigba is a really good player. Travion Henderson is a really good player. Marvin Harris Jr. is probably going to be a very good player. Emeka Ibuka is probably going to be a very good player. Ohio State has players. There's no doubt. Great playmakers. But my thing here is that you're going to give up some plays, but to the bend but don't break thing, right? The thing about that is that there is eventually a breaking point, right? Like we talked about a rubber band yesterday, right? You pull it and eventually it's going to get to that point where it's either going to break or it's going to bend back. And in these 2 situations that we're talking about specifically, third down and red zone, there are when your back is against the wall, and that's when you have to play your best, most competitive football, right? Like those are the big moments in football games. So you have to be able to hit those breaking points, because it's going to happen. Again, it's going to happen. You're going to hit those breaking points. Is Notre Dame resilient enough to bounce back and be better than Ohio State in particular situations? If they are, for me, I keep saying it, right? I've said this all week. Limiting their effectiveness, limiting them, not completely stifle them. That'd be great. If Notre Dame gave up 14 points this game,
if they do something like that, sure, Ryan, we're having a whole different conversation after this game. A 100%. Whole different conversation after this game.
And exactly. We really are.
Like, nobody's going to beat this team. No one will be. But that's not the expectation. I mean, when was the last time they scored under 20? Wasn't it the 2016 game against Clemson?
Maybe.
I think it is.
Was that the 31-0 game or whatever it was, right?
Yeah. And with all due respect, Tim Beck and Ed Warner aren't Ryan Day. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's the last time they've scored under 20 points. I'm looking at it now. No, I'm sorry. 2017 in game 2 against Oklahoma, they scored 16 in a loss. Wow. That's the last time they scored under 20. That was game 2 of the Ryan Day era, by the way. Mm-hmm. So, I take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. And that was a really good Oklahoma team.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so comparative to the expectation, again,
right,
you're not going to stifle Ohio State. That's not, again, you're not going to leave the game and it's 14, 17 points for Ohio State. Great if it could happen. But the point is that there's going to be a breaking points in this game. And Notre Dame's ability to be resilient in those breaking points are the big moments. And I know we're talking about from a defensive side of the football, but that goes offensively too. When Notre Dame's in the red zone, when Notre Dame is on third downs, got to convert, man. You got to be better in those areas than in Ohio State. But of course, first and foremost is you have to be good on first and second down in order to get there, right? Like you want an offense like Ohio State to play behind the sticks. You don't want to have let them have the sticks in their favor. So I agree completely. This is, again, I think all of these mesh really well together, so it's hard to kind of like distinguish which one is the most important, quote unquote, right? But I really do think that these types of games where you have 2 very good football teams, those moments matter the most. They're the money moments, if we can call them that. And I think that they will be a big determiner of who wins this football game.
It's going to tell us a lot about Marcus Freeman's football team too. Quickly on special teams, Ryan, we're not going to spend a lot of time on special teams. Just going to minute here. The 2 things that you and I agreed were absolutely key. It's obvious. This is one area where I think it's good to be simplistic. Win the field position battle, which means try to allow yourself to not have to go 85 yards every time you get the stinking football. but then make Ohio State have to go 80 to 85 yards every time they get stinking football, right? And not giving up the long returns, not shanking punts, not line driving one that the guy can return 20 yards, that kind of thing. Win the field position battle, and you can't have mistakes. You can't give them easy points. If you give them the ball midfield, they're going to score, most likely. I mean, you've got to make them work. And that's the job of the special teams. Make Ohio State's offense work. Make them go the distance every time they get the football. If you can do that, now the offense helps that too. Punt from the 50 instead of your own 20. That's how you can help too. I mean, John Sott's not a miracle worker where he's going to turn a minus 20 into a minus 15 or, plus 15 for you. But, that's that. The coverage has got to be great, and you can't fumble the ball like you did against Cincinnati, like you did against Clemson in 2018 or 15. You can't have those special teams mistakes that give the opponent cheap points. You can get away with that against NC State 2017 because they're not as good as you. You can't get away with that against Ohio State. Those things will be the difference between. Because if we think it's going to be a competitive game, and close one way or the other, that can be the difference between a 7-point loss and a 17-point loss because, you're now down behind 2 scores late because you did this dumb thing, and now you've got to try to force, and then they make a mistake, and all of a sudden what had been a competitive game for 50 minutes turns into a rout in the last 10 minutes, right? And those are the kind of mistakes you can't do. I mean, look what it hurt was on the opposite end. Look what the Notre Dame-Wisconsin game last year. Wisconsin rallies back, gets the lead, Notre Dame's quarterback's out of the game because he's injured. They bring in the backup. You sack him. He fumbles. You go down. You get the lead in the fourth quarter, and then bam, right back lead's gone because of Chris Tyree's touchdown. Can't have that stuff happen in the opposite.
That's exactly the example I was going to use was the Wisconsin game because, I mean, one thing that special teams can do is it can fracture complete reverse momentum. I mean, that completely flipped momentum in Notre Dame's favor, and Wisconsin never recovered after that. They never recovered. Like, that could fracture and completely change the momentum for a football game. A lot of times it's almost like offensive line play, Brian. Like there's a lot of times where I just don't want to even notice special teams, right? Like you do your job, you don't turn the ball over, you have a good solid punt inside the 10, you make the field goals you should make. Like you just kind of want to forget about special teams a lot of times, right?
Yep.
When you notice it, it's usually up for a very bad reason, right? And I think, again, that Wisconsin game is the perfect example. They have all the momentum or most of the momentum, and then Chris Tyree completely flips the script on them. And the Cincinnati game, you were losing at that point when Chris Tyree fumbled the kickoff.
Yeah.
But still, like that completely just continued the momentum in Cincinnati's favor in that first half where you're just like, oh man, this is debilitating right now. This is not good. This is really bad. Because now you have another part of your game that is just working against you, as if stopping Ohio State's offense isn't hard enough. We also have to worry about our special teams making a mistake, right? So I agree. I don't want to notice the special teams.
They weren't losing that game, though, by the way. It was nothing when he had that fumble.
You're
it was
right.
nothing, and they had an 8-yard touchdown drive to take a 7-0 lead. You're thinking of the interception that led to a touchdown later, or the field goal that happened on the next series. I think it was after the interception, I believe. No, I'm sorry. The interception set up the first score.
Mm-hmm.
That's what set up the first score. And then they fumbled the ensuing kickoff, and they got a field goal. So just like that, 2 mistakes turn a 0-0 game into a 10-0 deficit. Yep. And that's how it went. But yeah, you cannot have that in this game, right? You cannot. Because this
I just saw 99 problems.
Cincinnati ain't Ohio State. Let's be honest about that.
Well, I just saw 99 problems says I wouldn't notice a special team only if Chris Tyree's taking one to the house. That's fair.
Bingo.
That's fair.
No,
I'll take those.
That's so true, right? Like special teams need to be like your catcher in baseball, right? Like you only notice him if he does something bad or really good.
Sure.
Right? Like you don't just, hey, he caught all the throws. He caught all the pitches.
Maybe I'll rephrase myself. I don't want to notice the snappers, kickers, or punters at all. I just want them to do their job. And Chris Tyree, let Chris Tyree be an athlete. I'm good with that one. I'm good with that one.
Well, another example is remember the Fiesta Bowl in 2015? I mean, Notre Dame starting at like their own 12 on kickoffs, their own 12, their own 15. Because Ohio State was just kicking it high and the coverage team was just crushing Notre Dame down the field.
Man.
And like, you're not going to consistently go. And now that defense was better than this defense with all due respect, but we know more about that Notre Dame offense than we know about this one. That was a great Notre Dame offense. Well, that's what Ohio State did to that explosive Notre Dame offense. That was an explosive Notre Dame offense. But I don't care how good you are. If you have to consistently go 85 plus yards when you get the football, you're going to have a hard time scoring on a team that's really good. And that's, to me, that's the key. That's going to be a big key.
You want to talk about fracturing momentum? That kick coverage unit that day for Ohio State was just
brutal.
Man.
Well,
can you
brutal,
imagine being the
depending on what
offensive
your point
coordinator
of
that
view
day,
is.
Brian? It's like, man.
No. Nope. No. Last thing, Ryan, this is the overarching key. And then we're going to do a mailbag next. So we've got some questions in. Submit your questions if you want us to address them, or comments if you want to have some comments be made. But the last thing is this, Ryan. To win a game like this, there's one word that has to permeate through your entire football team. And it's not like the cliche things. Like, it's a cliche, but it's a more impactful cliche. It's not toughness, attitude. It's this: finish. You have to finish. You have to, when you get the ball, don't settle for field goals. Finish in the end zone. Finish off blocks. Finish off runs. Finish off plays. Finish off tackles. Finish off, finish off blocks. All that stuff. You have to finish. Finish your series off well. Finish. Yep. Do that, and you put yourself in an opportunity to be in the game in the fourth quarter. That's what Notre Dame needs. If they can be, here's what's going to happen in this game, and we'll dive more into this tomorrow. They're either going to get run early, or they're going to go into the game in the fourth quarter, and it's going to be really competitive. And that's, to me, how Notre Dame wins. I don't see a scenario in which this is like the 2017 USC game. I was simply making a point about that game, about how they put the USC defense in a bind. I don't see them holding this Ohio State offense to 14 points like they did USC that day. This line is better. There's more weapons on this team. Now, that was a great quarterback-running back combination, but I expect this receiving core to be better than that one, and I think the Ohio State line is better than that one. And with all due respect, Ryan Day is a better football coach than Clay Helton and all the guys he had on his staff then. Just a little bit of a different – I'm simply making the point about the bind you can put a team in when you start fast, like they did to Michigan State that season as well. But it's one of those things, Ryan, where if you can be in this game in the fourth quarter – that's where I feel like Notre Dame wins, because that's when the doubt starts to creep in to Ohio State, and that's when Notre Dame players realize, you know what, we're here. Let's go show them what we got. And that's where, leaning on a team all game starts to really have an impact. And so if they can go into this thing in the fourth quarter with it being a one-score game and one direction or the other, you start feeling really good. And then it finally becomes, that's the final area, Ryan, where you talk about finishing the game. So finish has got to be the theme of this Notre Dame football team on Saturday night. Finish everything hard, finish it fundamentally sound, and finish it with toughness. But it all comes down to that key point: finish. If this team can be about finishing and all the things that means, then they'll be in this game Saturday night, and come when the final clock ticks, they'll have a shot to come out victorious.
Yeah. Well, Brian, I know that we were fighting against the narrative for Notre Dame, where in the biggest games you fall to pieces and you're not even competitive, right? I want to see what a game looks like in the shoe. If Notre Dame is in the game in the fourth quarter, I want to see how Ohio State reacts. I want to see how Notre Dame reacts, because that would be the first time where you're like, this might be a little different. And that's when people start getting nervous. That's when people start getting excited. That's when the emotions can take over in a fourth quarter. But I mean, to your point, we've heard Harry Hiestand every single practice, because even the practices we're not at, when their video comes out, you can hear them, and it's all about finishing. And that is something that I have to think that Marcus Freeman is kind of live buying right now, right? The ability to finish. And we've talked about being better at tackling. We've talked about being better at blocking. Those things are easy to see, man, when you have the efforts that you can finish those types of plays. So it goes down to everything, though. Everything in a football game is about finishing the fourth quarter, finishing the half, finishing a drive, finishing a block, finishing a catch, like everything.
Finishing a run. Hey, that extra 2 yards that you dipped out of bounds is why you guys were punting on third down. Hey, perfect example. Last year, your boy Tank Bigsby finished that run right. You finish that run, you finish the game, right? Twice, actually.
My boy.
Right.
My boy.
Ain't mine. Not after that. It's like that
the
parent.
talent,
I
but
only
yeah,
claim my kid when he does stuff I'm proud of. Like when it's not, that's my wife's kid.
That's your wife's kid, yeah.
Yeah, I don't have kids, but that's my dog when they do good
That's
things.
what I say to my
Yeah,
friends when it's someone I don't
yeah.
like or something. I just say, "That's your
Yeah.
boy. That's your boy. It's
So
not my
it's
boy."
about finishing, Ryan. And
Yep.
if Notre Dame can finish and do all the things we talked about, again, these are not pie in the sky. Oh, gee, I don't think Notre Dame can do that. And everything has to go perfectly. And this is just play your game and play sound football, play physical football, play your game, use your talent. This is not this lopsided roster that people make it out to be. And in some areas say, well, yeah, they got more 5-stars here, but it's not like Notre Dame is trotting out a bunch of nobodies. Notre Dame has, Ohio State, like, well, look how many elite top 100 players we have on offense compared to your defense. I'm like, well, the same is true on the other side of the ball. Notre Dame has 5 top 100 players in their starting lineup on offense. Ohio State has 2, right, in their starting lineup. So, it's going to be about finishing, right? Be ready for the moment, answer the moment, and finish. And if they do that, they have a shot to win. So that's going to do it for our keys to victory breakdown. We're going to go to a mailbag next. But before we do get to the mailbag, I'll ask you all to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, and of course, make sure that you sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Also, you can check out our website down below, www.irishbreakdown.com, or just irishbreakdown.com. If that works as well, which I should probably say instead of www, because irishbreakdown.com will get you there, and it's not as many syllables. So definitely check all that out, Ryan. For us, we would appreciate that. And thank you for listening to the Keys to Victory portion of today's podcast. So, Ryan, it's mailbag time. And we got some good ones so far. So if you guys got some questions, please fire them in. We're ready for it. If you're an Ohio State fan and you want to engage and talk football, do it. We'll answer your questions. We'll engage with you. We've been doing that with Archer all summer. If you want to just come in here and troll, we'll block you and tell you that you need to grow up. So let's dive into this. And we've had several Ohio State fans who don't post as much as Archer, but still are here and have been very respectful, and we appreciate that. And thank you all very much for that. Alan Watson with a super chat. Thank you for that, Alan. He said, how many freshmen burn a year of eligibility this year, Ryan? That is a good one. So why don't you take your first crack at that one? Because I kind of have an idea of that.
Sure. I mean, so if I'm starting on offense, the guys that pop up are Tobias Merriweather's the guy for sure that I don't imagine will be keeping his red shirts.
Yep.
There's
both tight ends.
I think running backs will keep him there. Tight ends.
Well, that's because he's out for the year. So that's,
right,
I mean,
exactly.
that's right. Angeli, I don't.
Yeah.
Don't see him.
I was thinking, like Jabron Payne, you're probably going to reserve him.
Oh,
right?
I forgot about Jabron Payne. Yeah. But yes, you're going to
preserve that one. If
ideally
you can.
Like to, yeah.
Both tight ends potentially, right? So Eli Raritan, Holden Stays. Offensive line, I don't think so, right? Like I think you're going to preserve all those.
It would require some sort of injury, I think, to happen.
Well, before I forget, special teams, Bryce McPherson's.
I got him on my list. So I got him on my list.
Oh,
yep.
Making sure we're there.
Yep.
Defensively, do you think Tyson Ford will?
I don't know. I think one defensive lineman will burn a year. I think Josh, and if I had to pick right now, it would be Josh Burnham. Because I think Josh is going to be on special teams. I think he's going to burn. I think a lot of these kids on defense are going to – I have Josh Burnham and all 3 linebackers burning in a year of eligibility. And I think 3 of those 4 will be on special teams. Yeah. And I'm okay with that. Look, if Jalen Sneed is the player we think he's going to be, he's not a 5-year player. If Josh Burnham's the player we think he is, he's not a 5-year guy. Same with Tyson Ford, Junior Tuihalamaka, all these kind of guys. They're not 5-year players if they are who we think they are. So play them. If Josh Burnham is your best guy on 3 different special teams, then play him. Because you never know. His number may need to get called on defense down the road against Clemson, and you don't want that to be the first real action he's had in an impactful moment. Like, look, it may not be the same as playing defensive end, but I can assure you, as someone who played special teams as a true freshman and started at receiver, my butterflies were just as great in my first game on the kick return team as they were when I lined up a wide receiver. I can just tell you that right now, because you have a job to do and you've got to do it well. And fans may not care about special teams, but the kids on special teams better care about special teams. And so, yes, it is an important 100%. Thing. And you can't say, well, all 3 phases of the game have to be good, but then not be willing to play your best guy at a position because he's a freshman. You don't want to burn your eligibility. I think that's nonsense. So, yes, Ryan, I don't know which D line, but I think at least one D lineman will burn a year. I'm okay if Tyson Ford also does. I'll be okay with that because, again, if Tyson Ford's the kid I think he is, probably not a 5-year player. Aiden Byron may be because he's got a body transformation that he's got to go through a little bit. He may be a 5-year guy, even if he's as good as I think he is. I don't think that Tyson Ford is. So I'd play him, but he's got to earn that spot. He's been banged up a little bit, but I think at least one D lineman, all 3 linebackers. And I'll say this too. I think both corners burn their eligibility too.
Yeah. If they're already in the 3 deep on each side, I think so.
And then a punter. So that's at least 10 guys of that 20. Was it a 22-man class? 10 guys of that 21-man class of that class are going to burn a year of eligibility. So, Ryan, at least half the class, in my opinion, right now, burns a year. And the reason I think it's as low as it is, because that's actually a kind of a low number. It's because injuries, right? That's part of it. It was a 22-man class. If Jadarian Price doesn't get hurt, he's playing this year and he's burning a year of eligibility, right?
Yep.
And there's other positions. They have a lot of guys on this roster that are at positions that are red-shirtable positions: quarterback, offensive line, defensive line. Those are 3 positions where I'm still a big believer in red-shirting guys, unless they're just no-brainer, guys got to play, or no-brainer ceiling is such that he's going to be a 5-year guy. So to me, that's why I come down to the number that I have. It'd be 11 if Jadarian Price doesn't get hurt. No doubt.
Oh, easy,
no
right?
doubt.
Yeah.
Oh, easy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's done by the BYU game because he'd have played the first 4. You know what I mean? Like his eligibility is burnt by the BYU game if he's not injured. So that's it's good. Thank you for the super chat, Alan. We appreciate that very much. Michael Esk asked a question, Ryan, and this is a good one. It says, how do Ohio State receivers compare with the best USC receiving cores that Notre Dame has played in the past 5 years? So, Ryan, take a crack at that. I think it compares favorably. I think, look, here's the thing. Here's what's funny. Like some Ohio State fan in the chat was like, Marvin Harrison Jr. is better than Jackson Smith and Jigba. I'm like, okay, can we chill out a little bit on that?
Right? Not right now, he's not.
Maybe he ends up being so, but you
could say more talented. You can't say better right now.
Sure.
You can't do that right now.
Sure. Yeah. If you want to go more talented, they have multiple receivers that are more talented than Jackson Smith and Jigba if we're just talking about pure God-given ability. But he's not a better player right now. But the point is, they have a talented receiving core. It's very unproven. I love the fact that Ohio State fans will come at me, and there's been some really disrespectful ones this summer, which is really sad. But they'll say, well, Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka are going to be great players because of why? The bowl game. Okay, that's the evidence they have. And they're highly ranked guys. And then they'll in the same breath say Notre Dame has no receivers. And I'm like, you do realize Lorenzo Styles had more yards combined in the bowl game against a defense built by Jim Knowles all year than Emeka and Marvin Harrison had in that bowl game, right? You realize Chris Tyree had about as many yards in the bowl game as they had, right? So, like, they're going to be good, but Lorenzo Styles, again, a top 100 recruit, isn't. Some of it's just kind of nutty to me. Yeah. And, it's one of those things. But that also doesn't take – so I can think that's just silly and still also step up and say, but you know what? This is still a really good receiving core. I also want to remind you, for the Ohio State fans who are obsessed with rankings, in the same class that Marvin Harrison was ranked by rivals, what was it, 82nd? Lorenzo Styles was ranked 56th. So moving on to the point, this is still a really good receiving core for sure for Ohio State. And we can say that and be realistic. And it's a deep core. It's young. That's the only knock I would have on them is they're young. But at the same time, Ryan, you know my stance on youth at receiver. I just don't care about as much about it as I do other positions. As a former receivers coach, if a kid's got the chops, then it's my job to get him ready to play. They've got a really good freshman class of guys who can play. You know, Caleb Brown, as you remember, is a guy I really liked. I thought Keon Graves was one of the more underrated receivers in the country last year. Caleb Burton, I thought, was a tad overrated, still a top 100 caliber guy. The kid from Georgia, whose name I always forget his last name. I know his first name's Kofi. I always forget his last name. He's a really talented player. So they've got a really good, deep, young receiving core that is going to be good. How does it stack up against some of the receiving cores that USC has had? I think USC's had some units that are very similar, Ryan. and Notre Dame has held up well against them. And you look at USC, and was it 2018? They had Michael Pittman Jr.,
yeah,
Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyler Vaughns,
mm-hmm.
Velus Jones were all on that team
Mm-hmm.
as wide receivers. They had all those guys the next year, plus Drake London, who had over 500 yards receiving that next year. So you had Michael Pittman, 2nd-round pick, Drake London, 1st-round pick, Amon-Ra St. Brown, what was he, 4th-round pick?
He was. Yeah, but
and
he
Tyler
to have
Vaughns,
90-something catches as a rookie.
He was underdrafted. Yeah, no doubt about it. 2016, that group was good, but not quite as good. You had Juju Smith-Schuster, Darius Rogers, Deontay Burnett. Was a good group. The 2015 receiving core was pretty much just Juju, and then a bunch of Adoree was, I think, their number 2 leading receiver in yards that year, like 400 something. That wasn't quite the same group. 2014 was a really good receiving core with Nelson Aguilar and Juju Smith-Schuster, who was a freshman that year. So, in the last 5 years, I think I would say probably the 2018 group is the closest. Excuse me, the 2019 group is the closest that we've seen to what Ohio State's going to be thrown out there, in my opinion. And that was a pass game that Notre Dame did well against. Yeah. But with all due respect, Michael Pittman, Drake London, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Tyler Vaughns is absolutely comparable with what Ohio State's going to be throwing out on Saturday night.
It's always tough, Brian, because obviously, like, we know what those players became, right? At like the peaks of their career, and even in 2019, we knew what they became, right? Which is a little tough. I mean, because I think that you can make an argument that maybe Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka have more natural ability than a couple of those guys, but that
it's arguable.
Michael Pittman Jr. became a All-American and a second-round draft pick.
And he was coming off a year in which he had a lot of production, 41 catches, 758 yards. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown was coming off of a year where he had 60 for 750. Tyler Vaughns the year before had 58 for 674. To your point, they were proven commodities. And then you had the rookie in Drake London.
Yes.
To your point, yes, it was much easier to project the production there because those guys had done it. And whereas, as I said before, with Emeka and Marvin Harrison, they're incredibly talented, but they combined for fewer than 20 catches last year on the season, I believe, or around 20 at the most.
I think what did Marvin Harrison Jr. had like 11, I think, on the season. Emeka, I think, had 9,
like 8 or 9.
Yeah.
And almost half of that came in the bowl game, right? And so. Yes, I think that group absolutely can contend with this group. Now, the difference is that receiving core. Here's the big difference, though. That receiving core had Keaton Slovis thrown to it, and you're trying to take pressure off of it with Malapau at running back, right? Like, that's the difference. It's not the receiving core is not what honestly scares me, because there's things you can do to limit it schematically, pass rush. What makes this team dangerous is the trigger man and the fact they've had very good backs. I mean, for all the talk about how good Ohio State's been at receiver in recent years, I would argue their recent tradition at running back is even stronger. You got Travion now. You had J.K. Dobbins, Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, you were just replacing dudes with dudes. And
your boy Trey Sermon. Don't forget your boy.
I mean, you can throw. I'm not the one hammering the kid's draft status on Twitter, with all due respect. But that's the thing about that unit too. It's there are receiving cores that Notre Dame has faced that you could say can contend with this group. There have been. The difference is that those teams didn't have a C.J. Stroud at quarterback and a Travion Henderson at running back. That's the difference to me.
Can I just pull one thing up real quick? I know Seth Bevins just said you forgot they didn't play much because of Olave and Garrett Wilson.
No, nobody's forgetting that.
No, who forgot that, man? Like, we're saying that the receiver core could be very good, but there's question marks at the moment.
There's this assumption that, they're just going to step in them, but maybe they do. The point, we know why they didn't play. That's not. We've talked about Will Fuller and Golden Tate being 6-catch guys and going from that to 1,000 the next year. They still had to prove it. Right. Sure. And that's what we're saying is we're not even talking down the unit. We're just saying that projecting that 2019 receiving core for USC is very similar. Projecting this is even easier than projecting this group. Right. Because of the fact that they had proven it. And it's like
I think there's
Go
an
ahead,
assumption
Ryan.
now too, Brian, that like I think there's an assumption that you're just gonna you're just going to lose 2 first round picks that went top 11 overall, and you're just not going to have any like transitional stuff at all. And I think it's a little
Right.
silly, man. Like I think
Right.
it's reasonable to expect that like it's not going to be quite as good as it was, especially early on in the season. Maybe it'll be better. I might be wrong,
Right.
but like I don't think it's unreasonable to think like, hey, maybe it's not going to be quite as good as it was last year, because not only did
Sure.
you have 2 first round picks last year, you also had all the guys that we're talking about right now were also on the
Right.
team. So yeah.
Right. So they're going to be so good that they're going to be better than the combination of Olave, Wilson, and them. And the other thing that annoys me about Ohio State fans, it's being objective and saying, hey, these guys are talented, but they got to prove it, which is exactly what we've been saying about Notre Dame's talented players all summer, is somehow like disrespectful or we don't know this or that. It's like, guys,
Sacrilegious. Yeah.
be objective. This isn't a fanboy show, right? We know why they didn't play last year. We think they're very talented, but to say it's just going to be better in game one than it was last year is just kind of silly, if we're going to be honest about it.
Well, Brian, I mean, we talked about the Notre Dame offensive line a ton too, right? It's like we think it's going to be better, but there's a reality where it takes a few games to get rolling, right? Like
we've discussed that.
There.
Yes,
Yeah,
we've discussed that. Right. So we'll see how it turns out. But anyway, let's get back to some more questions here, Ryan. We got one from God Country Notre Dame at Barbecue for the mailbag if there's time. If Notre Dame has, say, 30 carries from the running backs, how do you see them being distributed? Also, over under 29.5 carries by the running backs. I mean, there's just so much context that needs to go into that one, Ryan. That it's hard for me to say. I would imagine I would hope that so if there's 30, and this is just 30 carries from the running back. So let's say there's 30 carries from the running backs, 10 from Tyler Buckner. And you're going to say it's 8 from Tyler Buckner, like let's say 2 from the receivers, or 10 from Buckner, 2 from the receivers, something like that. Getting around 40 carries. If Notre Dame creeps up to 40 carries per game, I'm going to feel like this is going to be a competitive game. Now the exception would be is if for some reason they're at like 32 carries, but they're averaging like 7 yards a carry, and okay, then your carry is going to be down. So if the yards per carry goes way up because you're ripping off big runs, then you're not going to carry as much. But if they're around 5.5 yards per carry, 5 to 5.5, you want to get to around 40 carries, because then that gets you around 200 rushing yards. That's ideally where you want to be. Yep. So I would say, Ryan, in that scenario of just running back carries, I would say, you're going to want to have like, 14. I kind of look at it like 14, 8 and 8, or 13, 9 and 8 in regard to Estime, Diggs, and Tyree is about where I think you'll probably see, or 14, 10 and 6, depending on how the question for me that makes this difficult to answer, Ryan, is I don't know where Logan Diggs is right now from a work volume standpoint coming back from the shoulder. We think he's going to play, but is he a 3 carry guy right now because of the pitch count? Is he a 6 carry guy? Is he a 10 carry guy? I don't know the answer to that, but if they carry it only 30 times, I'd say something like maybe 14, 10 and 6, 13, 10 and 7, somewhere around there would be where I would be at for that answer, Ryan.
And who would have the most carries in your
Audric? Yeah, it's what I said when we did our show on Sunday night. I think Audric leads the team in attempts, and I think Chris Tyree leads the team in yards. That's what I think this is going to be. Now, that's a microcosm of what I could see this game kind of playing out. So I'm just trying to be consistent with what I said at the beginning of the year.
Sure. And you also, if I remember correctly, you also think that Chris Tyree may eclipse in total touches over the carries.
Yes. This was just carries. This is just carries. Like to me, Chris Tyree needs 13 to 15 carries. It touches a game minimum. Touches. Sure. Now, if that's 8 carries and 7 catches, 10 carries, 5 catches, 11 carries, 4 catches, I don't care. He needs 15 touches. So I think their touches with Audric may be similar. But I think Audric at 14 carries would still get 2 to 3 catches, check downs and a screen or two, that kind of thing. But he said just carries, and so just carries. That's how I I guess that's how I hope the breakdown goes, in my opinion. Now, if Chris Tyree has more than 10 carries, and Audric Estime has more than 10 carries, I have a feeling that means Notre Dame's offense is rolling pretty good.
Oh yeah, 100%. I agree with you completely there. I was just wondering where you kind of had the pecking order to start the year, and because I have the same one. I have it Audric Estime, Chris Tyree, and then Logan Diggs. And that's mostly just because, like you said, what is the volume perspective going to be for a Logan Diggs? Because I think he is going to be an important part of the offense, for as in a whole season entirety. But for the first game, I think that's you're going to see, especially Brian. I mean, the more carries you have in this game, the better it says, right? Like if if Notre Dame has a lot of carries in this game, it's probably because they had a lead at some point, right? And that they're
or
kind
at
of
least
chipping
it was
away,
you were right there. You never had to come
Yes.
out of what your game plan was,
right.
and
You
you're
got
getting
to, you got to
movement up
stick
front.
into what you structurally do well, right? Exactly, 100%.
Yep. So here's a question from an Ohio State fan. I'm a Buckeye. Why do a lot of people act like Ohio State doesn't have motivation? They lost to Michigan. Their defense has been salted over and over. I don't know if I've ever questioned Ohio State's motivation, so I don't really know where that's coming from. So that's a different show, my man. Somebody else might need to address that, but we've never played in the whole, the players are going to be overlooking in Notre Dame type. No, we don't play that stuff. We do real analysis here. No, it's the first game of the year, and they're playing Notre Dame. I can assure you the Ohio State players are not looking ahead to who do they have in week 2, Ryan? Do you even remember?
It's somebody bad, isn't it?
Right. It's like they're not looking past Notre Dame to get to, it's like, was it like Akron, or let me see who they play in week 2.
It might be like a MAC school, something like that.
Let's see here. 2022, Ohio State plays Arkansas State. Yeah, they're not overlooking Notre Dame to get to that Arkansas State Toledo back-to-back games. They're going to be ready for Notre Dame. And if Notre Dame beats them, it's because Notre Dame was the better team that day. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not because Ohio State overlooked them or wasn't ready or took them seriously. And if you're Notre Dame, you need to be prepared for Ohio State's best shot because they're going to give it to you.
And also, I think Ohio State understands that like Notre Dame is the biggest threat to overtaking them as the Midwest power, right? Like I think they understand that. I would think, and they have a competent coach. I think they've been drilled.
I don't think Ohio State's players are going to look at Notre Dame as a threat. Mm-hmm. Just like I don't think Notre Dame necessarily looks at Ohio State as a threat. I think this is a really good team that's standing between our goals. That's what I look at it as. And what is the goals for Ohio State? It's Ryan Day said them, I think, yesterday. Beat the team up north, win the Big Ten championship, win a national championship. The reality is you can do 2 of those things, beat the team up north and win the Big Ten championship, but not have an opportunity to do the third if you don't handle your business against Notre Dame.
Yep.
Right? Now, I think if they lose to Notre Dame, but it's a competitive game, I think I've said this already for you Ohio State fans who didn't listen to our season preview. I said the loser of this game will be in the playoff. Because I think whoever loses this game runs the table. If Notre Dame is somehow able to beat Ohio State, I think that's going to be something that's going to really piss this Ohio State team off, and I feel really bad for the Big Ten. I do, really bad. Like, I don't think they'll play a 10-point game or less all year in the Big Ten if they lose to Notre Dame. I just – that's how I feel. So, but if you get blown out by Notre Dame, you run the same risk that happened to Ohio State in 2018. In all but one game against Purdue, at Ohio State team looked like a playoff team, except for one game in October against Purdue, and that kept them out of the playoff, right? So that's the only reason that's the only way I think it'd be a situation where they don't make it, which again is motivation for Ohio State to come out and play well. So there's nobody on this channel, neither one of us are sitting there talking about Ohio State's not motivated to play. They don't need motivation, and it's not even about Michigan or overcoming a loss to Michigan. That got worked out already. This is about looking forward to what their goals and their objectives are, and Notre Dame is a team that's standing between them and their objectives, and that's why we think Ohio State will be ready for this football game. Let's go down here. Christopher O'Kicky. I'm the Chris you met on the Turnpike. It was very nice meeting you the other day, Chris. I appreciate you coming over and saying hi, and appreciate you listening to the show. I do. Appreciate it very much. Ryan Loftus said he spoke to Bryce McPherson the other day, and he said he'll be on kickoff Saturday. Would have thought he would be punting. I'm excited about his debut. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago, Ryan. The expectation has kind of always been that Bryce would do kickoffs early on. Blake Groupie would handle the PAT and field goals, and then John Sott would be the punter. As long as they're all healthy, we expect that to continue to be the case. David Lowe asks, Irish fans, if Tyler Buckner runs for 100 yards and throws for over 200 yards, are we winning? You know, David, it's like with anything, there's just got to be more context to it than that. You know, I believe, if I remember correctly, you know, like what you don't want to have a situation of is and I'm going to try to find this on ESPN, but you remember like the 2006 game against USC where Brady Quinn ripped off like a 70-yard run against USC in 2006. And if you look at Brady's stat line from that game, I'm actually pulling it up right now. If you look at Brady's stat line from that game, it's kind of similar to the one you're talking about. You know, Brady threw for 274 yards and 3 touchdowns, no picks, ran for 74 yards in that game because he had a 60-yard run, and they got blown out. So there's a lot of context needed. Like if Tyler Buckner has like a 60, 70-yard run when they're down 27, he's probably going to end up with over 100 yards rushing, and he'd probably over have 200 yards passing. There's just more context that's needed to me than that. I would want to know. I think he's got to get more than 200 passing. It's got to be. You said over, but I think I'd feel better if it's like around 250.
Sure.
You know, I'd feel good there. But I would say this, barring some sort of weird context, if he has a stat line of around 250 and 100, this is going to be a good football game.
Yeah,
that I do think, because I think of the opportunities it does open up for other people.
Yeah, I think if there's nothing wild about the context too, Brian, like I would say, like if this is the stat line that you're working with, 200 plus, 100 plus, it tells me that you were probably pretty balanced that day, right? Like most likely, more often than not, that means that your offense was probably humming at a pretty good pace, right? A pretty good kind of distribution of volume as well. So David asked this one, I think, yesterday as well, and we answered a little bit, and I kind of said the same thing. I was like, in theory, that looks good, right? Like, I would look at that and be like, they probably had a pretty good day, but what was the context of how you got to those stats? What were the turnovers implied in there? What were, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of other things. What did the rest of the rushing attack do that day? Like, there's other factors, but for the most part, I would say that's probably a very balanced offensive day, most likely.
You just always got to be careful of numbers getting padded because of a big play. That doesn't necessarily shift the momentum of a football game. That's the reason I would say that. Like, you just have to be careful with that, you know, and because when we talk about big plays, one big play is not beating Ohio State unless it's the last play of the game of the offense. You know, it's not, you're not going to win because of that one play, meaning that fuels everything else necessarily. So we've seen it. We've seen guys put up big stat lines in games they lost. But yes, I would tend to think that it's going to make for a competitive game. Yes, I do. Let's get down here to Blaine Tiller. How many deep balls would you expect to see Notre Dame take per half in order to keep the secondary and linebacker to keep from cheating the line? Blaine, it's not about the volume. It's about the effectiveness. They can only throw 2, and I'm going to be happy. It's about, do you hit them? Because honestly, for me, Ryan, if they're throwing a bunch of deep balls, that's probably problematic for me. It means that they're not hitting them, and you have to keep throwing them.
Sure.
For me, it's about, are you hitting them? You only have to hit a couple of them, in my opinion, for this thing really to take off. And so that's kind of what I look at. Like, we've talked about the USC game from 2017 a lot, right? Brandon Wimbush threw 7 deep balls that game. He went 3 of 7. He didn't have a great percentage, but he hit 2 early. Yeah. And that was the key. Right. And so that's what I care a little bit more about, is that you hit some early. I think if they can hit 2 to 3 deep balls in the first half, just hit them. I don't care that they take 8 shots. Because here's the thing: the more shots you take deep, if like we talked about this the other day, C.J. Stroud had a 51-something% completion percentage on deep balls.
Yes,
if I remember correctly, and I'm going to look this up while we're talking, I don't believe Trevor Lawrence ever completed 50% of his deep balls at Clemson. I'm going to look this up real quick. I'm pretty sure that I'm accurate with that statistic. I don't think he ever did that. So I'm looking here now. He completed 43.1 in 2020. He completed 40.1. He completed 41.1% in 2019. And then in 2018, he completed 42.4%. And so when you're at 50%, you're really good. Yes. Having said that, that means the other 50%, you're getting 0, right? And you don't want to have a bunch of 0 plays on your docket, right? Sure. Now, if a couple of those zeros happen on 2nd and 1, okay, you took your shot and you stretch the defense and let them know that you're here. But I care more about hitting them than I do about volume. And if you can hit a couple big ones early, then yeah. But if you don't want to be taking a bunch of shots and they're not incomplete. Like if Notre Dame takes like 8, 9 shots in the first half, deep shots, one of two things is true. One, they're not scoring a lot because there are a lot of incompletions. And there's probably a couple deep shot Tyler Buckner scrambling around trying to launch one down the field on 3rd and 10. Option number 2, Notre Dame is killing Ohio State because they hit like 6 of them, right? I mean, it's going to be one or the other, right? You don't want like 8, 9 deep shots. You want maybe 3 or 4, maybe, but it's more about hitting them. That's what I care about, Ryan. Hit them.
Efficiency.
I don't care about the volume. Yes.
Efficiency and explosiveness. We've been talking about this, right? You want to create explosive plays, but you also want to be efficient on top of the explosive plays. Like that's, yep. You want to be able to take advantage. And I mean, Brian, like, again, you're playing against a really good football team. So you need to take advantage of your opportunities, right? Like that's pretty basic. I'm not breaking news by saying like Notre Dame, when they have an opportunity to make a big play, they got to make it because you're playing against a team that if you don't, they can jump on you quick. They can, and they can put numbers up and they can continue to hum along because they're that talented offensively. There's no doubt. You have to take advantages when you have them.
Right.
I know that was breaking news, take advantage and we win. Wow.
Right. Score more points and you're going to win. Yes. Thank you. But sometimes the obvious is the correct answer. Here's an interesting one, Ryan. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this. Alan Watson with a super chat. Alan asks, are all penalties bad? Go Irish.
In college football, no. All penalties are not bad, in my opinion. In the NFL, you have the spot foul, right, on the on pass interference. So, like, if I tackle a guy 40 yards downfield, so he doesn't have a completion, you get 40 yards, right? In college football, you get 15. So, what's worse, giving up a 40-yard pass or taking a 15-yard penalty? So, no, in that theory, not all penalties are bad. Usually, it's a bad indicator, though. It usually is. Like if you're a team that gets heavily penalized, usually you're not a very good team. You're definitely not disciplined for the most part. But yes, Alan, I would say some penalties are not bad. They aren't great either, but like, again, I'd rather have a 15-yard penalty than a 40-yard completion.
Sure. That's a really good one. That was one I was going to kind of go with. And sometimes I don't mind an aggressiveness penalty early in the game.
Sure.
Where you're really just come out and drill a guy and, it gives you a 15-yard penalty, but, like Bobby Bowden had this philosophy. Like he wasn't necessarily someone who kind of looked at penalties and was like, hey, every 15-yard penalty, every penalty is a bad one. I think it's the context, but there's some penalties I think are smart ones, like, on 1st and 10,
it's acceptable. I even think an example is like, Brian, like if somebody is like takes a late hit on your quarterback, right, and an offensive lineman just kind of gets in the guy's face and gets like a 15-yard penalty, it's like I'll accept that, man.
Goes
like,
out and just drills the guy.
Yeah.
You let it. Hey, you're not going to mess with our guy. Offensive tackle gets called for holding, and so it's 1st and 20 instead of 2nd and 18. Yeah, okay, I'll take that. As long as it's like, okay, this guy smoked me. Now you got to be careful there because sometimes let the quarterback climb the pocket and get a throw off or whatever. But there's sometimes you look at it and say, now I will say this too. There's very few times I'm going to be accepting of a penalty, but there are instances where it is a good thing in my opinion. The penalties that I hate is there are certain positions where it's not okay to ever get a penalty. I hate when receivers get penalties. Like I can't think of now this could be my bias, but I can't think of a scenario in which a receiver getting a penalty is a good thing. But as soon as I said that, okay, you yank a guy down who's about to intercept a pass because your quarterback threw a terrible pass.
You get an OPI.
Right. Yeah. Like that is like, again, so like there's always that one scenario where it's like, okay, in that extreme, I can live with it, but that depends on the certain, it was 3rd and 15 and we took a bomb shot. Why would you do that? Now they're just going to, back us up and make us do it again kind of thing or whatever. So, there aren't many, but there are tons.
Here's a different layer. What penalty drives you the craziest? I remember when I coached high school, every other game, you would have a wide receiver go off sides.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, guy, what are you? I can't.
The worst one for me is when receivers are not lined up correctly.
Oh yeah,
Not
yeah,
when the ball gets snapped before they're set. That's on the quarterback for me. Like, dude,
yeah.
you got to, but more of like when you know you're supposed to be on the ball and you're not, and
Mm-hmm.
like the Miles Boykin penalty against Michigan in 2018 pissed me off so bad. It's 21-0, and he catches a touchdown pass, but it gets called 28-10, and they would have rolled Michigan at that point in time. But
Mm-hmm.
instead, he's covering up Cole Kmet because he's not lined up correctly, and it comes back. You end up getting a field goal. Michigan needs one score to make it a game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that score makes it 28-17 if you don't have that penalty. Those are like just not being locked in penalties. I hate false starts. I hate offsides,
Yeah.
but they don't bother me as much as that, because in that instance, it's like it's a quick reaction. When you're just looking in and I know I'm supposed to be on the ball, or I can look and see we don't have enough dudes on the line, those are the ones that drive me nuts, because it also means a lot of people aren't paying attention. The receiver's not locked in, the quarterback's not locked in. Like, I always felt this way. If you're lined up incorrectly at receiver, the receiver is the first person to blame. The second person I was going to is the quarterback. Dude, you knew the formation we're in. Why didn't you get
Yeah.
that guy lined up? You're the quarterback of this team. That's one that drives me absolutely nuts, Ryan, as an offensive guy.
One that drives me nuts that I think is just a stupid penalty is that you can't jump over the snapper or whatever
Yes.
to block a field goal. I'm just like, okay,
Yeah, that's a dumb penalty.
sure.
It's a really dumb penalty. Really dumb penalty. Yes. All right, here's one from Leighton Burkholder. Says, question for B. Ryan, as a Notre Dame fan watching the game, what are some specific clues to watch for early in the game that show that Notre Dame is doing the things that it needs to do to win the game? Leighton, I'm going to say this kind of generically, and then I'm going to give you a couple finer points. But honestly, the things we talked about in the breakdown, right? Is Notre Dame running the ball? Are they being physical at the line of scrimmage? Are they being disruptive? Are they getting hits on the quarterback? Like, all the things we talked about in our keys of the game, I think, are things that all lead to that first point, which is start fast, right?
Yeah.
And so they all kind of lead to your question. But I think more specifically on top of those things, because I don't want to be like, well, just listen to the hour show we just did. That's true. But here is a couple things, Ryan. One thing I think is going to be very important early, and this is sort of an all-encompassing key: how do you respond to adversity? How does Notre Dame handle a turnover by the offense? Do they hold Ohio State to a field goal? How does the offense handle an adversity or positive changes? How do you handle sudden change? Your defense gives you a short field. How do you respond to? Because this will happen sometimes. Your defense gets you the ball quick, and they give you great field position. You're not ready. You're sitting there with the offensive line coach and the receivers coach, and you're talking about stuff. Oh, shoot, get my helmet. I got to run in. We just got the ball, and you're not locked in, and you end up settling for a field goal. I think of the Clemson game in 2020, where, what was the score at the time? It was, I think, 20-13, and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah had just returned a fumble for a touchdown. The very next drive, he forces a fumble on like 3rd and 6. Remember, he comes from behind, strips it from Amari Rodgers. They recover. The offense was not ready for that drive. They go out and they lose 2 yards. And so instead of it being 27-13, because here's how close they were to the end zone, they lost yards on the drive and still kicked the field goal.
Yep.
You go punch that sucker in the end zone, and all of a sudden that's a 27-13 game. We're having a whole different conversation about how that game plays out, right? So it's that kind of thing too, is how do you handle adversity / sudden change situations? If Ohio State scores, how does the Notre Dame offense and then defense respond? If the offense scores, how does the Notre Dame defense respond? Those type of things. I think that's going to be a key for me, is how does this team handle things that get them off of their normal thoughts and routines? How do they handle adversity is going to be a big part of this game as well.
Mine are a couple generic things, I guess. One is where the line of scrimmage ends up, both offensively and defensively. Is it playing in your favor? So offensively, if you're running the football, are you asserting a new line of scrimmage in your favor? Defensively, are you creating havoc in the backfield by asserting your line of scrimmage in your favor that way? And then the other thing for me, Brian, is I want to see who has more missed tackles, right?
Yeah.
Like, that is the biggest thing that I want to see, because I think Notre Dame has some players that can create big plays. I know Ohio State does, right? And we've talked about limiting impact a lot this week. I want to see Jackson Smith and Jigba catches a 5-yard like a 5-yard slant, but he only gets a 7-yard gain instead of breaking it for 25, right? Like, I don't want to see that, but I want to see Lorenzo Styles be able to kind of do that conversely, right? So I think number of broken tackles on both sides of the fact, and who's asserting the line of scrimmage better in their favor. I think if Notre Dame does both of those things and are winning both of those convincingly, then I like their chances. But, again, we'll see how it plays out.
To your point, Ryan, Ohio State played 13 games last year, correct? Notre Dame played 13 games.
Yep.
Notre Dame on the season was credited with, I think, I'm looking at 113 missed tackles last year. It's way too many. That's almost 10 a game. Ohio State last year was credited, this is according to Pro Football Focus, was credited with 152 missed tackles last year. So
that's a lot of tackles.
That's a lot of missed tackles.
Yep.
And Ronnie Hickman had 15, Tommy Eichenberg had 11, Taraja Mitchell had 11, Cody Simon had 10. Now, 2 of those guys aren't in the starting lineup now, and I would imagine that's part of it. But the point is that's a lot of missed tackles, right? Yes. And Notre Dame had a lot of missed tackles as well. J.D. Bertrand had 19. Next couple guys had 8, right? Clarence Lewis had 7.
J.D. had 19 last year.
Yeah, 19. Some of them I remember going through the season, and this is going to be true for Ohio State, I'm sure, as well. Some of them were like, dude, that's not a missed tackle. Like, come on. Like, what do you think? He was never there. He didn't make a good play, but that wasn't a missed tackle. No, he had 19. Now, if I remember correctly, he had a bunch in like a game or 2. He had 4 against Oklahoma State. Yeah, so he had a lot of those. But he had like 3 against Florida State, 3 against Purdue. Couple of the ones against Florida State, I was like, that's not a missed tackle. But still, you take 3 or 4 away, that's still a lot of missed tackles.
Yes.
Right. And you could go through the Ohio State scene like, dude, that's not a missed tackle. Come on, man. Like that. No, that's ridiculous. And sometimes it's 3 missed tackles on one play, which adds to, it's not like 152 different times that someone missed a tackle on 152 different plays.
Process. Yeah,
right. But the point is that both of them had way too many missed tackles, which goes to Ryan's point. The team that tackles better or the team that forces the most misses in the tackling game is the one that could have it could be in a game that we expect to be somewhat competitive, one way or the other. Those are the types of things that have a really big impact in the game. There's no doubt about it. Quinn Kibler says, for the mailbag, if Chancey Stuckey was at Notre Dame in 2019 and 2020, would Book have been better? Trying to gauge the jump we will see in production. I know Book's issues were between the ears a bit also. No, I don't think it would have been a whole lot different, to be honest with you.
I mean, it would have been better for the receivers, right? Well, the current version of Chancey Stuckey anyway. Chancey Stuckey in 2019, who knows, right?
I mean, honestly, a guy that played as long in the NFL as he did, like the first year I coached receivers, dude, I had an All-American and 2 all-conference kids, right? Like, if you got the chops, you got the chops. And if you have talent, you have talent. I have a feeling he would have enjoyed working with Chase Claypool. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But no, I don't think they would have been a whole lot better. Book would have been a whole lot better simply because I don't think Ian Book's problem was he just wasn't willing to pull the trigger in the games that mattered. And I don't think in the big games, you're not getting 5 yards of separation against Bama in 2020 or Clemson in 2020 or if you would have, Georgia in 2020, I mean, you were still going to have to pull the trigger and show some guts. And that was kind of always my issue with Ian Book. And I don't think it would have mattered a whole lot. I mean, the Saints right now have, in my opinion, one of the best receiving corps in football, or best receiving coaches in football, in Curtis Johnson. I believe Curtis Johnson is still with the Saints, correct? Is that receivers coach?
I think so.
And Ian Book still won't throw the ball. I mean, I think his last preseason game, if I saw correctly, Ryan, he averaged like 4.4 yards per attempt.
Wasn't great, man.
And I know it's different for the NFL than college.
Sure.
Like a 10 yards per attempt in the NFL in college football is not going to be 10 yards per attempt in the NFL. I get all that, but still, that's not good. Actually, Cody Burns is now the receivers coach for the Saints. So it's his first year. Remember, he left Georgia Tech. Now that I remember, I think he's the guy that left Georgia Tech right at the end of the spring, if I remember correctly. No, he was at Tennessee. That's the guy that left Tennessee. The other guy went to the Ravens. He left Tennessee, and that's one of the things that hurt them with Cardinal Tate. Now that you say that, I remember.
Gotcha.
But Curtis Johnson was their receiving coach up to the point.
He was the Auburn quarterback turned receiver, right?
Yep.
That's Cody Burns?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I remember Cody Burns.
Yep. So, no, I don't think it would have made Ian Book a whole lot better. I think it would have helped last year. I think it would have definitely helped Jack Cohn a lot more than it would have helped Ian Book, in my opinion.
I
It would have
just
helped
saw
Ian
some.
Book's. Can I change
Yeah,
this? It would have
yeah, of
helped
course.
Ian Book statistically because against some of the inferior teams, he would have put up better numbers in those games where he was more willing to throw the ball down the field. A better coached group of players would have helped then. Is that fair to say? But it wouldn't have changed things a whole lot better when the games mattered. With Jack Cohn, I think it would have because Jack showed a willingness in the big games to attack people. He just didn't have support, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. Well, I just saw someone had said that Ian Book got cut for the Saints. We know. Yeah. He was just saying for this preseason, he was with the Saints, obviously. So that's why the example happened. Yep.
And that's partly why he got cut.
Yes.
The Eagles claimed him, correct?
Yep. So he's on the Eagles now.
That's going to be interesting. Whew, okay. Bill Walsh says Bama moved Devontae Smith around and got the ball to him in space. We need to do that with Lorenzo Styles. Bill, I could not agree more.
I think you need to do that with a couple receivers.
Braden Lindsey's another one. I don't want to see them just lining up X, Y, and X, Z, and W, and they're just in that one spot the whole game.
Yeah,
I don't want to see that. I don't, and I don't think that's what we'll see from Tommy Rees. But again, got to see it to believe it. But I think that's
it's a perfect example though, that Alabama game when I talked about you need to tackle better. That's a perfect one, right? Like I think about Devonta Smith just running a bubble screen, and that's how they won, man. Their athletes were better in space, and Notre Dame's athletes were better in space. That's the point blank to it. So,
yep, no doubt. Next question from Milton Fan 15. Maybe a dumb question, but what position does Foskey play in the NFL? Defensive end or linebacker? The Viper position confuses me as it relates to professional teams. Let me just say one thing real quick, and I want to get your opinion, Ryan.
Yep.
I think that the Viper position for Notre Dame translates more to a defensive end. At least it will this year. I thought last year they did more stuff that could be viewed as a 3-4 linebacker, but I think this year's version is going to be as an end. But I never loved Isaiah Foskey in the scenarios that were asking him to play like a 3-4 outside linebacker. And I think sometimes you can say a guy can do both, but for me, I do think Isaiah Foskey can play in a 3-4 as a 3-4 outside linebacker. Just like I think Bradley Chubb played as a 3-4 outside linebacker. I think Bradley Chubb would have been better off playing as a 4-down end, however. That's just my opinion, and I feel the same way about Isaiah Foskey.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy for me. I think I already wrote like a preseason scouting report on Isaiah Foskey where I said that ideally he's a 4-3 defensive end with his hand in the dirt. Like he can do some stand-up rusher stuff at times. But to your point, Brian, like if he's a Pittsburgh Steeler, for instance, right, it still runs kind of the 3-4 base type of thing. He would be great as a Bud Dupree type of player, right? Where you're not playing him in space a ton. So he's not like the Sam linebacker in the 3-4. He's your weak side player. So he's rushing the quarterback more often than not. I don't want him working in space.
It's like a stand-up end is basically what he's doing, right?
That's all it is. Yeah, because you're going to slant away, and he's the weak side defensive end. That's really what he is, right? I want Isaiah Foskey going that way, not that way. That's all. That's all it comes down to. I want him attacking the quarterback.
100%. Yep. So again, could be 3 down, could be 4 down, but the point is the same. That's the role for him. And I just have never felt like the Broncos really found a role that fit what Bradley Chubb does well, in my opinion. And injuries have hurt him too, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that was, I mean, Bradley getting hurt in what was his second year or third year, whatever it was, that like really hurt him a lot, his development. But still, I think he's still a good player when he's healthy, but you know.
Let's get to some more. B. Ryan, who is your sleeper quarterback on Notre Dame's schedule? Ryan, we've kind of talked about this one before. You want to go ahead and get into that one? There's a couple, I think, that we could discuss on this one. I think the kid that they're going to face first weekend of October, first game in October, I think for me is the sleeper one that tops my list. How about you? Yeah,
Jaron Hall. That's a good one. I think that's the one that makes the most sense, honestly. I mean, I guess could you still call the kid from Stanford as a sleeper, I guess?
I mean, when you're talking about being projected as a potential top 10 NFL draft pick, I don't think you're a sleeper anymore.
Right. Sure.
Should be.
Jaron Hall is the most underrated quarterback probably on the schedule, I'd say, from BYU. The kid from UNLV just had a really nice game. I know it was against some FCS team, so like let's see if that translates much, but like he had a nice game. I actually kind of look, Garrett Schrader is not going to look great from Syracuse.
That was going to be my other
pocket kid. Yeah. But like if you're running an offense where you're accentuating his skills as a runner, he's a really good running quarterback. There's no doubt. So I'd say Schrader or I'd say Hall from BYU are both good players for their system that they play.
I think Schrader can and should be a better passer than what he was last year. I don't think they really Yes, I think he can. I think he can throw the ball better than what we saw last year. Part of it was just him, getting used to a new system, and then part of it is I thought they overplayed to his running ability last year. In my opinion, it was just not a real creative pass offense.
Mm-mm.
If they change that this year, then I could see a scenario in which Syracuse is a little bit more potent on offense than right now I expect them to be. And that's going to be an interesting thing to look for this year, Ryan, is what kind of change they're going to have, because the guy that's running their offense this year, you know who their offensive coordinator is, right? It's Robert Anae, who was at Virginia last year. It's a whole different type of offense. Now,
yeah, they were a very wide open offense.
Right. Now, the thing about him is you're not going to see him running the offense they used with Brennan Armstrong last year. But go back and watch some Bryce Perkins film when he was the offensive coordinator with Bryce Perkins. I'm not saying that that Schrader is as good as Bryce Perkins, but I could see some stuff like that where he is using the run to set up throws and do more damage from the pocket. I think that's a kid that if the offense is he produced some look. I don't know why this guy never gets talked about. He's an older guy. Maybe that's why. But the reality is this guy's produced two of the best quarterbacks to play in the ACC for schools not named Clemson in the last 5 years. Right? I mean, he was the receivers coach. I'm talking about as the coordinator. Bryce Perkins and Brennan Armstrong are two of the best quarterbacks in the ACC not named Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson in the last 5 or 6 years.
This question was about underrated quarterbacks, sleeper quarterbacks. Was there any bigger one when Bryce Perkins was with Virginia, man? He was a really good football player.
Really good player. Still in the NFL, I believe, or at least he was in spring camp. I don't know if he got cut or not.
He's been with the Rams last couple years, I think, on the practice squad. I don't know if he made the team this year or not, but I mean, he played pretty well in the preseason too, man. He's not a bad little player. He's not.
Right. D-Troll Hunter says his twins are coming Sunday at 10 o'clock. C-section taking me from 3 to 5, buddy. Congratulations. Very, very happy for you. Hope everything goes well with you and the missus. And you and Vince need to talk, man. He can give you all. It's very funny. He's going from 3 to 5 because of twins, and Vince went from 2 to 4, or no, he went from 1 to 3 with twins, and now he's up to 5. So his twins came earlier, so he went from 1 to 3. Get with Vince. He can help you on how to handle having 5 kids with 2 of them being twins. So good luck to you, buddy.
God bless you guys, man. I cannot imagine having 5 kids. It takes a special type of person.
Me neither, buddy. Me neither. Got a super chat from Michael. He's got 2 of them. We'll kind of put them together. His first super chat is, did Ohio State play a Buckner-type dual-threat quarterback last year, and how did they do? And then the second part of his question is, how does Ohio State defend Buckner? So let's take that first one, Ryan, is did Ohio State play anybody with a quarterback that's like Tyler Buckner last year? Mm-hmm. I don't think – I mean, I'd say the closest thing they kind of had was probably the kid from Nebraska, who is not very good, but he's probably the most dual-thready of that. I don't really consider Cameron. I mean, Cameron Rising is sort of a dual threat, but not really. I mean, his numbers are good. He had some good production last year in a run game. Had 499 yards, 6 touchdowns, but he was more of a scrambler, could do the occasional run. I don't view him as the same boat as Tyler Buckner, but he was probably the second or third most productive quarterback that they played last year as a runner. And
how about
gashed Ohio State? I mean, look, Ryan, he had 11 carries for 92 yards and a touchdown against Ohio State, and he went 17 of 22 for 214 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Utah scored 45 points. I would say they didn't handle it really well. Like Notre Dame doesn't handle dual threat quarterbacks really well either.
I was going to throw one other name is Talia Tagovailoa. He's pretty dual threatish player, but I think they killed him, right? I think they killed him that game.
Maryland, he is the epitome, and I don't know if it's the Maryland impact on him or him just fitting Maryland, but he is such a on some Saturdays you're like, wow, that kid looks really good. And then on other Saturdays, like, how is this kid on scholarship? I say that hyperbolically, right? Like, of course I know why he's on scholarship, but like this kid should not be starting for them. And then other games, like, man, this kid's really good. And that's the interesting thing about Maryland is they actually have talent. They have actually they're I would say I'll say this, they're in the top half of the Big Ten when it comes to just athletic rosters. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah,
They just
offensively
you just
especially.
never know what they're going to get. If they can just if Mike Locksley can just find some level of consistency, Maryland could be a 7 to 8 win team this year, in my opinion.
Because they have a couple. They have a couple good offensive linemen, Brian,
Yeah,
and they also have Dante Demas coming back from injury.
yeah.
They have
Raheem Jarrett.
Raheem Jarrett, who's a good
Yeah.
football player. Like they have some weapons.
Yeah,
To your
like
point.
Anthony McFarland a couple years ago, and I mean, it's strange. And like you saw it against Ohio State a couple years ago. You remember that game that Maryland had against was it? I think it was Anthony McFarland's last year.
McFarland was ripping off runs all day
Oh my
early
gosh.
on against that man.
I mean, it was insane. It was like, what the heck is going on right now? And if I remember, I'm trying to remember what year that was. Was it 19? No, it wasn't 19. It was 18. It was 2018. They ran against Ohio State. They had 405 passing yards, 283 rushing yards, and scored 51 points against Ohio State. You know what they did the next week against Penn State? They had 3 points. But here's the thing. I'm sorry. That was Ohio State's numbers. Against Ohio State, I was looking at total defense. Against Ohio State, they scored 51 points at 196 passing yards and 339 rushing yards. Against Ohio State, went for 535. Do you know what they did the game before that against Indiana? They had 542 yards. But here's the funny thing is, here's what was bracketed around that. Against Michigan State before Indiana, 100 yards of total offense and 3 points. A week after Ohio State, you scored 51 stinking points against Ohio State in 2018. That wasn't a great defense, but it was still Ohio State. Sure. The next week against Penn State, they scored 3 points and had 259 yards of offense. The week before, they had 100 yards against Michigan State. They scored 63 points and had 712 yards against Illinois. The week before that against Iowa, they scored 0 points and 115 yards. That is the most bizarre type of stuff I've seen in my life, and that's just kind of been Maryland's MO before Locksley and since Locksley. That's the weirdest team in college football, in my opinion. That there's just games they can look like $1 million. Like, how do you score 51 points on Ohio State and 0 against Iowa and 14 against Temple in the same year? It's the weirdest thing. The absolute weirdest thing. I'll never figure that team out.
They make them tough in Temple, man.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'm going to move on from that one.
A lot of Jersey kids on that roster.
But back to the original point, Ryan.
Yeah.
I do think Ohio State has had trouble with dual threat quarterbacks. I mean, I don't consider Anthony Brown a dual threat quarterback, but he had a couple nice scrambles in that game. You know, I mean, he put up decent numbers last year, but, you know, against Ohio State, he had 65 yards rushing on 10 carries. I mean, they've had some issues there. And I don't think he or Cameron Rising are Tyler Buchner type of athletes. So, but you know who else has trouble with dual threat quarterbacks? Just about everybody else. I mean,
right, Notre Dame.
Yes, there's a reason why teams want that. It's because it's hard to defend. You just have to have way better players than the other team. That's really what it comes down to. You just have to have way better players. And how they defend Buchner, I think there's a couple things they need to do. They need to kind of take a little bit of a page from Ohio State's book, and that is mix up your looks to get him guessing, make him think it's a you know, zero fire and then bail and jump under. Maybe you can jump under a quick slant or something like that, or knock it down, or, you know, get him thinking he's going to bang a little RPO quick out cut and then you squat on it. And he's got to now, oh shoot, I'm scrambling, because if you can take away that read on an RPO, it's like, okay, what do you do now? The line's run blocking. You thought you were banging that quick hitch or that quick out, and now it's eaten up. Now you got to run around and scramble. Maybe you can tackle them for a loss. Those are going to be things to look for. And then control, you know, don't let Notre Dame control the line of scrimmage. You know, what we talked about earlier is true the other way, is don't let him drag out his read zones. Make him declare early. You know, make him pull that sucker now because you've crashed hard or because you got to push up front or something like that. That's really the way to do it. It's easy to say. It's just not always easy to do, in my opinion. RH, another one of our Ohio State fans who's been a really good part of this, some conversations this year, which we appreciate you, says, scheme question for Brian. I'm going to do 2 straight RH questions, or 1 question, 1 comment. Scheme question, Brian. How would you defend 12 personnel scheme that Day loves when they put the second tight end in the slot boundary and have 2 receivers to the field side, overhang safety has to choose? I honestly wouldn't really – I would have my overhang safety, number 1, be – I mean, for Notre Dame, it'd be the rover. I'd have him focus on the perimeter. I'd say, look, I would probably just say, look, you guys aggressively take that on. I would have a quarters type of look to that side, Ryan, most likely, and kind of have that be my alley player and have my overhang, whether I bring a safety down and have a guy over top and maybe have my rover backside. That's the other option, is you can kind of have your rover backside and just kind of roll your safeties down. So you put your boundary safety to the middle of the field, and then bring your other safety down and put your rover backside with your corner stacked over top, sort of playing that second safety role. That's another potential sort of alignment if you're going to go, because basically what he's saying, if I am hearing this correctly, so it's 12 personnel, and the tight end is going to be the slot boundary side, which basically is like, I mean, he's pretty tight to the line of scrimmage because of what you're working with. I'm not worried about that guy being a pass game threat. It's just about, okay, taking away the quick perimeter stuff. So I'd probably play my corner tight to try to, by alignment, take away the quick now screens, because that would be the only thing I'd be worried about, is that quick now screen where you can let that tight end get downfield, get your corner blocked, make him have to cut back inside and try to make my linebackers miss. Yep. Is what I have to do. It's just about trying to throw off the timing. So those are a couple of the different things I would do. Is I would be more focused on the run game there and then trying to protect the deep ball outside. That's what I would do. Try to funnel everything back inside. That's what I would kind of the different possible options to look at. Anything else to add to that, Ryan?
No, I think the only thing I was going to add was what you just said, is funneling everything inside. I think, again, Ohio State wants to get to the perimeter, right? Like whether that is in the run game or it's, quick screen outside or it's a vertical shot outside the numbers, they want to work outside, right? So outside in is absolutely what I would rather do.
Yep. I'm going to wrap up here because I know we got to get rolling. We got a lot of stuff to get to today, but I did have a couple more things here real fast. RH says Marvin Harrison Jr. is a great player because he works like nobody in that building. His dad taught him that well. He's the only player that they're working extra most of the time. A couple comments to that. Yep. We have never, ever, ever said that Marvin Harrison's not an extremely talented kid.
Sure,
I don't know what else we can say. We have simply applied the same standard to him that we've applied to Lorenzo Styles and Braden Lindsey and Tyler Buckner and every other talented Notre Dame players. He's got to now go show it, and showing it in a bowl game against a secondary decimated by injuries is not, to me, something that automatically means you're going to be great. Remember Dorial Green Beckham? He was incredibly talented, and he didn't pan out for certain reasons. There's other guys that were very talented players that pan out for other reasons. We think he's going to be very good. For this matchup, you're asking him to go from being a freshman who caught 11 passes to being Garrett Wilson. Might be asking a lot for one game. That's all we're saying. All right. So we think he's a great player. The other part of it is, honestly, that's not necessarily a great thing. If your sophomore receiver is the only player there working extra most of the time, that's problematic. You'd hope that there's more than one guy working extra. I can assure you from people I've talked to, there's a lot more than just one Notre Dame guy working extra. So I would hope that that's not true for Ohio State's sake, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's not a good indicator if he's the only guy working hard. Not a good indicator.
Ryan, that thing that Tommy sent you, I'm going to need to kind of do that. I think that's a good thing to answer on the message board. So I think I'm going to take that photo and I'm going to put that on the message board. So Tommy, that thing that you sent Ryan, we're going to put that on the message board and answer it because it'll be easier to answer there in that format, and then also more fun because we can all engage it and other people can answer. Real quick from Tyler Smith, which corner for Notre Dame will need to step up the most against Ohio State and why? Also on 97.1, The Fan here in Ohio, they're worried about our DNs. Yes, they should be worried about the DNs. I think that is going to be a matchup. That's a very fair thing to say. At corner, Ryan, my answer is short and sweet. I broke it down the other day. Tariq Bracy. If Tariq Bracy can have a great game in the slot where he's going to be matched up against Jackson Smith and Jigba quite a bit, that's going to be the thing we talked about. Force more incompletions. Now, Jackson will still get his, but make him work for it. If you can do that and you can create more incompletions, even if he catches 8 balls, but you threw at him 15, 16 times, that's where Notre Dame needs to be. What you don't want him for is for him to have 8 catches on 10 attempts. Right? That's the thing. Make him work for it. That's where you can kind of create some of those misses. I know Clarence Lewis is a big one, but like if Tariq plays well, now my safety doesn't have to worry about protecting the slot. He can help Clarence outside. So I think Tariq Bracy for me is the corner that has to play big opposite Cam Hart in this game. I think he has to play. Well, actually, he won't be opposite Cam Hart. A lot of times they'll be on the same side of the field. And so if they're going to play the way we think. So I really think Tariq Bracy one way or the other, is going to have a big impact on this game. Either he struggles covering Jackson Smith and Jigba, or he plays really well and makes Jackson work, which I think helps the Notre Dame defense be more effective.
I mean, we could dumb it down, Brian. We could say the best slot receiver in college football last year is going to be the player that's playing in the slot, right? So Tariq is an absolutely. I was surprised, like for most of the offseason, we didn't really talk much about Tariq. And I'm not even talking from us perspective. I'm saying like from a chat perspective, and I think it's very important in this game.
Last one here real quick, Ryan, before we get out of here. Off topic. Blaine Tiller says off topic, but what do you think about the Penn State-Purdue game tonight? And what do you think of Penn State not cracking the top 25 with all that talent? I think it just shows that James Franklin has consistently underachieved with that football team the last couple of years. They have not played to their potential. I think this is a huge game for both teams, especially Penn State. Look, Penn State going on the road against Purdue, they're not a top 25 team. They should be. That's embarrassing that they're not a top 25 team preseason. This is the kind of win that I think immediately gets them back into the top 25. There's a lot of talent there. I still feel that if Sean Clifford doesn't get hurt last year, they're a 9-win team, and the outlook is different. They don't lose to Iowa if he doesn't get hurt, and they don't lose to Illinois if he's not playing that game banged up and having missed the previous game and the loss to Iowa. So that's just how I feel. I could be wrong. It's how I feel. It's not that he's a great quarterback, but it's just the drop-off was that significant. And at least with Sean Clifford, he's going to get the ball where it needs to go to. He's just not going to do it overly impressively, but he's going to get the ball where it needs to go to. Because their record when he starts is not bad at all, So anyway, that to me is a big game. If they lose that game, you're going to start to see things get really interesting in State College over the next year, Ryan, because that's going to be a bad sign. If you're losing to Purdue with all the losses they had this year, with all due respect, that's not a good sign for Penn State. Not a good sign at all.
Give me Purdue, man. I told you this morning, didn't I? This is my upset pick of the week.
I'm going to put it on the board here in a little bit. So I got you and I think one other person picked the Thursday night game. Somebody picked the backyard West Virginia, the backyard brawl, which is a game I'm actually taking West Virginia in this game as well. So that's I don't know what the spread is, so I don't know if that's my upset pick, but I think West Virginia is going to win that game. I think Pitt's going to take a big step back this year, a really big step back. So everybody, that's going to do it. I think that's all the super chats we got to, Ryan. I don't think we had any other super chats in here today. I'm just quickly going through to look. I don't see any other super chats. So we appreciate you all very, very much. Great week. We'll be back tonight. Last IB Nation Sports Talk of the week is tonight. Tomorrow, we will have our prediction show starting at 1. We're going to do the Notre Dame game, and then we're going to talk about Utah, Florida, talk about Oregon and Georgia. We're going to talk about Cincinnati, Arkansas, and there may be one other game we discuss. We might talk about LSU, Florida State a little bit as well. Those are kind of the big games from the weekend. Saturday, 10 a.m. is going to start our IB countdown to kickoff with Sean and Vince. I'll have a little segment there as well. And then, of course, post-game Saturday night, we finally got our hotel booked. We're about 3 miles from the stadium. So we will be able to kind of get the post-game show up relatively quickly. We were going to try to get about 45 minutes down the road just to kind of get out of Columbus, but the prices were just as expensive there as they were in Columbus. So say, hey, you know what? Let's just get to the post-game show right away. And then, of course, Sunday night upon further review. So we've got a lot more for you. Make sure you stay IB Nation Sports Talk tonight, 6 o'clock with Sean and Bobby. Tomorrow, we'll make our predictions. It's going to be a lot of fun. Stay locked into irishbreakdown.com. Sign up for the boards, everybody. Have a great, safe rest of your days. If you're traveling to the game this weekend, be smart, be safe, enjoy yourselves, and don't do anything that you will regret down the road. Don't let yourselves get baited into things that just aren't worth your time. So enjoy the game, and hopefully the Marcus Freeman era officially kicks off in impressive fashion. But we'll find out. But, hey, we'll be here no matter what. Win, lose, well, there's no win, lose, or draw anymore. Win or lose, IB is going to be here. So you can always be assured. That's the only guarantee I have this weekend, Ryan. As long as I'm still breathing, we're going to be here. And if I'm not breathing, Ryan, you know how to start a show. You handle business, okay? All right? So be ready to rock and roll. So have a great day, everybody. Thanks for being with us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.